first item of business, subdivision and ordinance text amendments. Greg Sodi.
Good afternoon. Tom and I are gonna, I was gonna take the preliminary plats and Tom was gonna take the first two items, the special events and the penalties. Excuse me. Tom was gonna take the first two items, the special events and the penalties, text amendments, and then I'll take the third one, but I'll stand up at the podium.
Okay.
You should have each gotten a handout that says Chapter 70 zoning up at the top.
Yes.
What this is, we actually, we had a very exciting meeting at the Planning Commission on this issue. And we went back and revisited the drawing board. The purpose or the concept or the issue is, we technically, if the board remembers, we approved an SUP for Rounton Farms wedding events. And we called it a private recreational use. Not all that comfortable with the wedding events being a private recreational use, and Mr. White kind of pointed that out as well. So we realized, Greg and I talked about it, we realized we really didn't have anything for events, like wedding events, and I mean, we have quite a few events in this county. We have actually a large number of events. So one of the things we talked about is creating a use that allows events like weddings or any other number of outdoor theater groups or any sort of event type activity. So what we did, and if you look on the definitions, which is the second page, we created two definitions that we called the commercial event venue large and a commercial event venue small. Same definition, just one dealing with 100 people or more and one dealing with less than 100. And we created this use that would be a venue that on private property, including weddings, concerts, theater performances, athletic events, conferences, parties, receptions, etc., where such event is conducted or held for a fee or other financial remuneration, or is held in conjunction with a legally permitted bed and breakfast. So this section just creates two new use definitions. And I'll stop there and see what kind of questions are coming.
So if I've got a farm and I have 200 guests, but I'm not charging any fee, then this doesn't apply?
Well, if you have a farm, no, well, for one thing, that would be a commercial venue for, I mean, if you have a farm and you're doing it every weekend, having guests, well, even if you're not doing it for a fee, yeah, it still wouldn't apply.
That's right. I'm saying if
No,
I'm
if there's-
not charging a fee, so I'm just having a big
Right.
party.
It would have to involve a fee or some sort of other compensation.
Okay.
And that's why the word commercial's in there at the beginning of it, to clarify that.
Okay.
I like the word commercial, but it just so happened that maybe it was Friday, within the last few days, someone sent me a chain of emails, and there's a farm in, I believe it's Fauquier County, called Liberty Farm. And this, it apparently is in a conservation easement. And the PEC is after the owners of this farm, but apparently very aggressively based on this chain of emails, because they are violating the terms of the conservation easement, because the PEC is alleging at least that they're having commercial, it uses that word, events. And so I guess my question is, and I know this came up a little bit with the Rounton Farm because of their deed prohibits commercial activities, and so I think commercial is the right word. I think we're talking about commercial activities, but I just raised the question: how are we going to deal with that issue? I mean, I know it's not our responsibility to enforce the easement, obviously, but I also am not thrilled about being in a situation where we're knowingly permitting, either by right or by special use permit, an activity that is in violation of, and so, I mean, you can tell me that's okay, we don't have to worry about it, and maybe I'm fine, but it's out there, and there are at least some groups that are actively concerned about these kind of things. So I don't know, I don't have an answer, I just have the question.
I'm concerned about board, and I understand where you're coming from, but I'm coming at it from a little different angle. I don't think the board can be concerned about contractual obligations that the landowner may have with somebody else. I mean, I think we need to be worried about our end of it, and they need to be worried about making sure all their T's are crossed otherwise. These conservation easements are not one size fits all. They're different, and they can have different provisions in them.
Both of these happen to be outdoor foundation.
And so, and of course, you know, there's a lot of people who feel that I forget her name, I know who you're talking about, who's having this round with the PEC. You know, there's a lot of people who feel like she's in the right and PEC's in the wrong, so.
I mean, I don't know the facts.
I think we should stay out of that, because I think it's a can of worms. And
So if we were in a situation granting permits or something like that, we wouldn't be concerned about an easement or not.
I mean, theoretically, there could be some type of deed restriction against this type of event outside of a conservation easement.
Yeah.
Someone could have conveyed the land in 1948 with the understanding that there would never be X done on the property. So, you know, if we're gonna start worrying about conservation easements, I think we need to start worrying about, the next step would be, you know.
Well, we don't want to get in the business of even hinting that we would enforce private property rights. I got a call from a guy last month wanting me to enforce deed restrictions against his neighbor. Like, that's not us. You got the wrong department.
Those would be civil actions between the two.
But let me just sort of go on your thing. If we were talking about something where we were trying to grant a special use permit or a zoning change, under those circumstances, would we be considering a conservation easement then in our deliberations on that?
I personally don't think we should.
Well, for the county, our best day is somebody under conservation easement comes, gets it rezoned commercial, uses it that way, and there's at least some AG opinions that would say a conservation easement can be waived by the holder of it. That's the best thing for us, would be to rezone something and the conservation easement go away. So, I mean, I don't know the downside to the county in authorizing something on a conservation easement that the easement itself restricts.
But the rub is that we have an ordinance already regarding taxing that says if a SUP is issued
Right.
on property that's in an easement, it no longer qualifies for land use taxation. It basically comes out of the easement.
And that's based on a 1993 Attorney General opinion issued to the Commissioner of Revenue here in Orange.
Yeah, that's a local Orange ordinance. I mean, like I said, I like this. I like using the word commercial because that's what we're talking about here. I worry about unintended consequences, and maybe we're fine.
But there are consequences. If somebody's got a conservation easement and they come in and make this application, they're the ones running the risk. They should contact the easement holder and describe what they're getting ready to do. I mean, but it's their risk, not ours.
So on the reverse of that, when the Outdoors Foundation comes in and asks, you know, somebody's asking for a conservation easement, and they come and ask basically, what does our comp plan say? That's a different thing, and it's not, and basically all we're doing is just say, read the comp plan. Okay. I mean, because we do get involved a little bit on that end of a conservation easement. I'm not anxious to jump in on the other side, as you suggest we should.
Nor I'm trying to prevent getting dragged in or jumping in, either one.
So if we're looking at something, we would look at it in terms of, well, whatever here's what we've defined as the event, and I'm not sure what all the extra rules are with regard to that, but, so we're just gonna basically say, hey, we're not gonna pay attention to whether it's conservation easement or not, it's not our issue, and if an individual who lives next door who doesn't like it because it's in a conservation easement and they're holding big parties, or if they're holding these commercial events, that's for them to deal with in civil law.
Exactly. And as was pointed out, theoretically, you could have a deed restriction that says this property may only be used for a hunting lodge, and if it ceases to be used for a hunting lodge, it reverts back to the owner, and then they come in and get a CUP for a commercial event venue, but that's a private matter between the person with reversionary interest in the deed
Okay,
restriction.
all
It
right.
doesn't involve us.
This issue actually kind of came up at the last planning commission meeting where someone gave a piece of property to a church, and unfortunately for them, they didn't put a deed restriction that it could only be used for a church. But that would be another case where if someone did sell a piece of land only for a church, and someone else came to us and wanted us to put a Dollar General say on it, it really would not be our responsibility whether or not there was a deed restriction.
Especially with it being for profit instead of
Exactly.
donations, so.
It was sort of interesting, sort of a reverse of that case I was involved with up in Northern Virginia. A guy who had his own shopping center with his own CVS. He sold a piece of property which adjacent to it. And the guy said, I'm gonna put a Walgreens there. And this guy went, ballistic. But he never put any kind of deed restriction on that. And the guy got his Walgreens. I mean, it's just, he could have put in a deed restriction. No competition
No
with
pharmacies.
shopping centers, but he didn't. All right.
Is there any, after the enjoyable planning commission meeting regarding these definitions, is there any way that we can couple definitions when we make them with an example? You have it in here, but it was in there before.
But see, what you have to do is you have to, if you turn to the next page,
Right.
it actually, and I just put these in for discussion purposes under an ag zoning district, permitted uses, and I added number 12, commercial event venue small.
Right.
And then I added under the SUP version, large commercial event venues. So, and that was a hard part that the planning commission didn't seem to get. The definition doesn't actually create anything.
That's why I was asking that. I have no problem with it, I understand it, I just don't.
Well, and that's why I added the specific language, conducted
Okay.
for fee, because we actually had the word donation in there, we
Yes.
took that out. We said fee or financial remuneration, and we actually put the word commercial in there just to try and eliminate the concerns of the planning commission.
I have no issues with it. I just.
Well, I think whenever we're looking at something like this, we need, first of all, there needs to be a problem that we're addressing. Because if there's not a problem, then why are we addressing it? And then if there is a problem and we're addressing it, are we addressing it in a way that is going to solve the problem without creating more?
Well, and the problem in this case that we are trying to address is the fact that we have more and more bed and breakfasts that are now becoming wedding venues. And neither I nor Greg interprets a bed and breakfast to include hosting weddings. I mean, a bed and breakfast is bed and a breakfast. And some of these wedding venues, I don't know if you saw, I came in this morning, and there's a big old Chestnut Hill overflow parking sign pointing to where you go. Some of these these weddings can be large amounts of traffic and an activity, and we realize technically.
All of which we like.
We like it, we want it. And so the purpose to this was actually to make legal what technically probably is not legal right now, which is a lot of these bed and breakfast hosting weddings. So what we're really trying to do is solve this gray area of bread and breakfasts in particular, and possibly other types of events.
Well, but there's a huge difference between a wedding and a Rolling Stones concert. And
And a what?
a Rolling Stones concert.
Oh.
And so, to be ridiculous, so obviously
You
there
have
is.
at least two young people
Yeah,
usually.
right. So, to me, a wedding is, I wish we weren't even talking about weddings, because to me, that's being unfair to weddings. I wish we would just talk about events, but there's a big difference between a private event and a public event. Public events have the possibility of ballooning out of control and becoming a major problem. Very few private events fall into that category. It can happen, but you don't normally have. I mean, you can go on YouTube and see some weddings that ended badly, but it's unusual. But my biggest problem with this is actually the numbers that you put in here.
Well,
Be-
again, remember,
because-
this is for discussion, we just picked these numbers out of the air.
Well, but they were, I mean, this is the second iteration that these
Well,
numbers have been
I
made
didn't
in.
hear any different numbers like.
You know, less than 100 people means 2 people. So you could be saying that in order for a couple who's staying at a bed and breakfast to have a justice of the peace or a preacher in to marry them, they have to get a permit, or that falls under it, depending upon what zoning it is in.
That actually, the bed and breakfast he mentioned hosts 2 to 4 weddings a weekend, along with their elopement special. Literally.
But
And they charge a.
But if they have that, it's a by right use,
Well,
and there's nothing,
well, it may be, and we were just handed this, so I'm not sure what all this is. In the original one, which I thought was what we were gonna be talking about, it in fact said it required a temporary use permit.
Yeah, that was good.
I
Yeah.
took that out.
Okay, so I mean, that's a major difference between saying
Yeah.
something is, we're just gonna define it and then say you can do it under these circumstances.
And understand, it's a couple of things that are critical, though. It's a venue for events. If you hold a wedding inside the bed and breakfast house, the house that's being a bed and breakfast, I don't see that as a separate venue. This is dealing with venues, because what's happening in a lot of these bed and breakfasts is they're actually setting up, converting barns, building additional structures.
Big tents.
What
Tents.
if they, yeah, okay, I mean, what if they do it outside in the?
Well, that's a
Courtfield.
venue. It's a venue. If the outside, if you've got an area that you've made it pretty and made it nice for weddings, and it's designed for hosting weddings, you've turned it into a venue for weddings.
If it looks crappy, then you're okay.
Well, and again, understand, technically, right now, it's illegal to do it. This actually expands rights, it doesn't restrict rights. Because technically, right now, Greg could write every one of these bed and breakfasts in the county and say, you are violating zoning, we do not allow events.
he's smart enough not to do that.
Only if he gets a complaint.
Thank you.
Only if he gets a
Well,
complaint.
and that's where I was gonna make a observation. If it's complaint driven and you've got a adjoining property owner that has just really been, their peaceful, quiet and enjoyment has been disrupted, and do something, are these permitted? Right now, I guess the technical answer is no. Well, then that person's gonna want you to take some action against that. This would make them legal in that sense. Not debating the merits of it, but it would make them legal.
And like Roundton Farms, technically, probably the answer should have been no, we don't have a use, you're not listed as a permitted use, just because all they're doing is a barn for weddings.
Yeah, and that's,
They're not even doing a bread and breakfast, they're just doing a barn for
The
weddings.
other question is, when we look at the large event, and we're saying we need a special use permit for the large event. You guys gonna have one large event?
No. A
Is there what-
venue for hosting events, and it's dealing with creating a specific venue as opposed to renting Farmer Brown's field to have an event. That's not an event venue. You're not creating a venue. I mean, this is dealing with repetitive.
All right,
It's no difference than having a yard sale or selling
all right,
one day. You're not creating a sales business or a wholesaler or a retailer.
But I'm getting at in other words, we've said for under 100, the guy's got a bed and breakfast, he wants to do this, he goes ahead, by right, no permits, no nothing. He just does it,
Right.
which is fine. But if we've got a big one, and we can talk about the number, he's gotta get a special use permit. Assuming that if this venue is gonna do it, hold more than one, he's probably he's gonna hold more than 100, or whatever our limit is. He's going to do it multiple times, or he wants the ability to do it multiple times.
Right. And we could add some language that says regularly hosting events more than X times a year,
Where did you put it under special use permit? Which one is it? I'm not finding it.
It's-
The large event.
If you
It's
go,
the
if
third
you-
page, or
it's
the.
the-
Yeah,
it's
303.
The third page starts
it's
the special
21,
use,
okay. It's
and then it's
21.
21, which is on the fourth page.
Okay, all right.
And again, I just stuck those there for discussion purposes.
And
I don't-
Greg, what is the difference between I know what a special use permit is. What is a temporary use permit?
temporary use permits, that originated, I believe, in 2009, 2010 for the C2 area for a flea market in Lake of the Woods. And then in 2011, we wanted to create I don't want to say venue now, but we want to create an opportunity for people who live in agriculturally zoned areas to be able to have shows or events or corn mazes or what have you. And
Just to
that's why I
pull
walked
one out of
into
your
it.
ear.
Yeah, that's why I walked into it. We began discussing that about April or so of 2001.
Are we do we use temporary use permits
Yes.
these days?
Yes, we do.
Give-
I'll get requests from, say, Grayland Farms. I mean, they're fairly regular on that. And,
How about
but
the
they
guy-
incorporate
how about
that
the
into
guy
their
who does
SUP
the,
though.
fireworks? That's a separate fireworks permit.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
I
that's
don't
an
know about that
administration.
one.
Yeah, that's not a,
Brian holds the whip down there.
yeah.
Just,
For the fuse.
I don't have any problems with this, but I definitely wanna go on the record saying that I would rather see more enforcement of the rules and regulations that we have than making more and more of them. I mean, I see the merit with this, but in general, something I hear on a regular basis is, well, such and such doesn't have to do this, or I saw this, or I saw that. Okay, is this a complaint, or you just, somebody says, well, I had to take down my signs. Well, you can drive around and I would say there's probably more sign violations in this county than there is any other single violation. Why do we have a sign ordinance? It's and I'll leave it at that, but
Well, there's sort of two things happening here. I mean, I think Tom's point is right, that in terms of the small venue, we're actually adding a by right use.
right, and like I said, this particular one I don't have any
Yeah,
issues with.
but on the large one, there we are making a change that is potentially troublesome,
More restrictive.
because it is more restrictive.
More restrictive than what? Technically, you can't do it at all.
Yeah, I understand, but we're not restricting it.
We're not enforcing it,
Yeah.
but technically, it's illegal right now to host all these events.
And why is that? Explain why that is.
Because under Virginia law, there's two ways to do a zoning ordinance, and everybody does it the first way, which is you can only do what's allowed on the list. You can either have unless it's on the list prohibiting it, you can do it, which nobody does.
Inclusion or exclusion.
But exclusionary, inclusionary.
Okay,
So
alright.
you're only legally allowed to do in your zoning district those things listed as permitted. There's nothing in, for example, the A district that permits
An event.
events. So, any kind of events, bull riding events, weddings, conference centers,
All right,
conference.
but let's say that we're not talking about a bed and breakfast here. We're talking about a farmer who's gonna have 200 people, friends and relatives for a big party. That's an event.
It's not a commercial event.
That's not a commercial event.
Understand, but is he permitted to do this?
Well, the way the law works is like your home. Your home, if you're in a residential district or in an ag district, one of the things that's allowed is residential uses.
Okay,
Well, there's a long list of what are considered ancillary. Super Bowl party is an ancillary part of a residential use.
even though I got 200 people.
Right, because you're
it's
doing
a-
it, you're doing
It's
it
an
once.
ancillary residential use.
Right, but if you, in your house, start serving drinks on Friday night and charging everybody to come, that is not an ancillary.
Okay, all right,
residential use.
so from the standpoint of the non-charging, the non-commercial, if we can, that's an extension of the residential, allowed activity.
And farmers historically had large events and friends and people came.
That's fine,
so-
that's fine, I'm just trying to make sure that we,
But we've got a little bit of an issue, I think, because we still have, I don't know if there's a definition for it or not, this private culture, recreation, or institutional use. But that's not by right, that requires a special use permit.
Mhm.
And so you couldn't have that big party theoretically as a recreational event. I don't know what do we define these terms private cultural, recreational, institutional use.
But the point is, and I think in his definition, the limiting factors are
As we
commercial and a fee.
But the critical word is 3 letters long, use. A party at my house doesn't convert my house to a party use. A party or gathering at the farm doesn't convert the farm to a farm, some other use. The private recreational use, the use is the key word, as opposed to a private recreational activity on a property. But if you're using it, if the purpose or the use of that property, and that it's that word that is the controlling issue, is what's the use of this property? Your normal use of a residence or farm is residential or farming, as opposed to if you build a conference center, the normal use of that conference center is to hold conferences.
So theoretically, we could, on 70-303 under permitted special use permits, we could, under number 12, have it read private cultural, recreational, institutional, or large commercial event venue. Because that all requires a special use permit. So we're sort of, and I'm not suggesting we do that, but we're putting in the same category a private
Your
event
concern
and a
is,
commercial event.
you're concerned that when we say private, this would mean the guy who's holding a recreational event on his farm.
Well, I don't know what the definition of that is.
No, for example,
But
private
you're saying that the term use,
uses, again, understand, these are just the definitions over here, and then we put them into the uses permitted by a special, requiring a special use permit. This is a primary use of the facility, the property, as opposed to some,
And that is why I would like to see the plugins for the definitions at the same time as the definitions. Because it will remove a lot of this
what do you mean by
discussion.
plugins?
Do we
Examples.
Examples of, this is for a bed and breakfast establishment, are what these definitions are for.
No, because we said not limited to weddings, concerts, theater performances, athletic events, parties,
it's all healthy.
receptions, where it's held for a fee or we're actually expanding the things you can do in the district. Or held in conjunction with a bed and breakfast, that's or, so it's, you can have a venue, you could build yourself just a conference center, or you could have a conference center as party, bed and breakfast. So it's actually expansive.
Well, I see the same discussion occurring here with the revamped definitions.
I
We
guess
had
that,
the planning
I have a little, I think I now understand when I say private cultural, recreational, institutional use. We're talking about that as a continuing use kind of thing, as opposed to a one-time cultural event on my farm.
And also the word private, so lest it throw you, I'll give you an example in the ABC arena. Bars have to close at 2. Private clubs do not, so what a lot of bars do is they have a membership, and you pay $1 to join, and it becomes a private club after 2, and then they can continue to sell of alcohol because they're no longer open to the public, they're now a private club, not subject to this. So when this private use, that's the sort of thing it's anticipating. It's a club, an organization, but it's for members only.
Greg,
So-
do you happen to have the definitions for this private cultural recreation? I mean, are
Yes, I don't
those
have-
defined?
I can look in the code, I think there's a copy in here.
I don't,
There should be
I
some.
don't wanna revisit them
No,
as
that's
definite,
okay.
but I just wanna see, do we have compatible definitions for those? Because
The more rules and regulations we make up, though, the more we get caught in our own,
On our own petard.
yes.
oh yeah, no, I agree.
And so that's why, I'm not opposed to addressing a need if there's a need there, but, you get into, first of all, these, from what I could see, and I just got these, 25 minutes ago, so I haven't been able to digest them, but this, if we were to adopt this as it is, we're equating events that the general public can buy a ticket to get into with events where there's a private invite list, and I think that's a problem.
For a fee. Has to be a fee involved, private invite list. Has to be a charge, a
White, we
fee.
don't.
Well, but people don't charge, you're talking about a fee for the people to use it.
Right.
I'm talking, so people aren't, you don't, when you have a wedding, you don't generally charge people a fee to come to the wedding. But the venue, as you like to call it, is charging a
Right.
fee to whoever's paying for the wedding.
Right.
Okay, and so I'm drawing a distinction between that type of event and an event where the general public can come in for $15 a head. Those are two different kinds of events, but there is no distinction drawn here, and I think those are two very different types of events. You also get yourself into a situation where Tom Sawyer was okay as long as he was painting the fence, but once he started charging other people to paint the fence, he can't do that anymore. It is the exact same behavior, but we're gonna say case A is okay, case B isn't okay. So you're gonna get into farm situations where people who maybe wanna have a group come in and ride horses, well, they can't do that. Whereas riding horses is perfectly fine. And if you get, so there are all different kinds of graduations here. Everything from a Rolling Stones concert to two people getting married. And this, I see this is kind of a one-size-fits-all, and I think we're gonna run into a lot of problems if we adopt it like it's written here.
I don't know, I think I see them as fairly well defined. And we're looking at, somebody wants to charge hold a rock concert. He's probably gonna be in a large, commercial event.
Well, if he wants to charge to hold a rock concert, it's gonna be a temporary event with Greg. If he wants to build a 3,000 seat outdoor amphitheater for hosting concerts regularly,
Yeah.
then he would fall into this
Okay.
category.
Mr. White, to answer your question, there is no definition for the private recreational.
There is
Now
not.
we really got a problem, because if we require a special use permit for something we haven't defined, as well as for one that we have defined, and they look sort of like the same thing.
Well, that's a
We have a
problem I've mentioned several
Yeah,
times, is
uh,
that, and that's when we have a rub, but.
I thought that was the case, because I looked back when we were doing the Routen Farm thing, and we allowed it under a use that was not defined.
Well, and that's what we did, we shoehorned it.
Yeah.
And I told the folks at Round Farms, I said, the reality is if you get sued by a neighbor who claims you have an illegal SUP because you are not a private recreational use, I said, don't be surprised if you lose.
Well, here's where I was headed with that, because I thought we didn't have it. Maybe what we need to do is get rid of that private recreational or whatever use it is, because it requires a special use permit, and only have something more like this venue issue. Because I think what we're concerned about, if at all, is someone that and actually there's one getting ready to be built right now that I'm aware of, builds a facility specifically for the purpose of hosting fee-based events. It seems like that's one where we probably ought to take a look at and issue a special
Well, they cannot
permit.
legally do it right now.
That's right. But otherwise, if somebody has a barn and they just allow it to be used, or a field or whatever, as I said, I'm reluctant to go down that path. But I'm also not comfortable having a special use permit required for something that has no definition.
Well, and again, I think you said they were well defined, Lee, but they're not defined. The difference that I'm making between an event that's a private event like a wedding and a public event where you pay a fee to get in, there is no definition here that doesn't speak to that at all. It's not defined at all. They're treated the same.
They're both the same.
They're treated the same, and they're greatly different things.
Because we're treating it at the next level up.
It-
We're treating it, a restaurant theoretically could be open to the public or could be rented for a private party. We're at the restaurant building level, the venue level. Because theoretically that restaurant could be closed on the weekends and rented for private events.
But you're saying a cornfield could be a venue.
You could turn it into an event.
Well, but, yeah, okay, I mean, that's, if we were talking about the town of Orange, we were having this discussion, okay, then that would be a totally different thing. We're talking about the wide open spaces out in the county. And you can't on the one hand say, cause you're kinda going back and forth, Tom, to my ears, at one point you're saying a venue is a building, and then again you're saying, well, a venue is anywhere where you do something.
Well, no, a venue is
And-
not necessarily, I used an outdoor amphitheater as another example.
Well, but you don't even need an amphitheater. I mean, you could just haul in some loudspeakers and some hay wagons and start singing rock and roll. And you've got a nuisance for the neighbors, but you don't have any venue there. There was nothing done ahead of time.
No, but you're talking about a fee.
If you,
And if
Maybe
he-
you are, maybe you aren't.
If he
That's
doesn't
another-
have a
that's
fee,
another problem.
if he doesn't have a fee and he
This
wants to
doesn't
bring
apply.
in 200 people and hold a rock concert on his private property,
Nothing
which
we
is his friends that he has invited, that's residential,
yeah, nothing we can do about
and nothing we can do about it.
But
What if he starts doing it every weekend?
it. Nothing we can do about it.
As long as he's not charging any money,
they don't even need.
Well,
other than maybe a nuisance.
what is the distinction that we think
But
we
we're
should
worried,
consider? Is it whether or not there's a charge, or whether or not there is a physical, I'm trying to get around building, or
Structure of some sort.
yeah, whether or not something is actually built or constructed or whatever that is essentially permanent, not wagons, but, you can build an amphitheater by, with a bulldozer and enough time, you can create a place where people can sit, but you've constructed something.
We do have I mean, I'm not being flippant, but we do have definition for structure in the zoning ordinance.
Right.
So-
Probably one way to think about it maybe is about their improvements. Those improvements may be temporary nature as porta potties. That's usually, sanitation's usually like the first order if you go out to a field.
So you could say if you're building a taxable improvement under the Commissioner of Revenue's definition of improvement, then you want an SUP. I mean, I'm not suggesting it, that's a
Well,
way to go
Well, we're
about
only
it.
gonna catch businesses. The whole purpose of this, we're gonna catch people in the business of
Exactly.
hosting events. Because it's a commercial venue designed, basically you've got a business doing some sort of events, whether you're doing a business of hosting rock concerts, or a business of hosting weddings, or a business of hosting
What-
conferences.
Yeah, one of the other thresholds that this may get to is a banquet license, or if there's alcohol being sold, then you have to have a standing ABC license or a temporary banquet license. The Department of Health, if food is being sold, then the health department has certain standards for the sanitariness of that.
I could just see that if we're not careful, we're gonna get in a situation where someone has to get a special license to have a wedding. And then the next weekend, their next door neighbor is gonna have 500 people over for a rock concert. And we're gonna have to tell them that they can do that by right, but because there were 102 people at his wedding, that at this bed and breakfast, that required a special use permit. And I just think I think we're opening up a can of worms that's gonna require, I almost guarantee you, we're gonna have to come back to if we adopt it as it's written, we're gonna have to come back to it again and again.
Let me,
to
let me,
refine it.
let me extend this into the C1 and C2. Because you were talking about, okay, I've got in a C2 or a C1 area, I've got a restaurant, and they wanna have a wedding in the restaurant, 50 people. That would become a commercial event small. Commercial event venue small. Wouldn't that?
Again, it doesn't apply
Because,
for having a wedding in a restaurant. It doesn't, this only catches venues that are designed for hosting events. That's what's a commercial event venue, is a venue for hosting events. That's the purpose of this venue. This venue exists to host events.
well,
So
okay,
if
isn't
they-
a restaurant?
Well,
But a restaurant's a more specific definition.
If a
Yes.
bed and breakfast has a wonderful grove of elms that grew up there without anyone planting them or tending to them, does that mean that bed and breakfast can have a wedding there every Sunday As long as they're not charging anybody a fee, they can just say, you know, if you're staying at the bed and breakfast, then then you can go out and have a wedding underneath the maple.
In that scenario, I think that would be perfectly proper, but what that bed and breakfast is gonna do is they're gonna put in the brochure the package deal that includes the $1,000 fee for having your wedding under our maples. And that's how it's, in the real world, that's how the bed and breakfast.
So what we're really annoyed about is that these businesses are making money and.
No, not at all.
Not at all.
What,
I think
Well,
we're trying to give them permission to do it.
yeah, what we're bothered by, I'm bothered by as a lawyer, is they're doing it illegally right now, cause it's not listed as something they're allowed to do.
And if I could throw in, well, two things. The bed and breakfast inn just relates merely to lodging, and one way we could, correct that is to say including, certain events. I mean, that's just a thought, just a stream of conscious thought. Another issue for me, as zoning administrator, is that a person might convert a barn, which is normally exempt from the building, except for the electrical, I believe, right?
Now, once you go from an agricultural use, which includes an office,
Mm-hmm.
once you open it to the public, if I'm not mistaken, once you open it to the public, it is bound for the life safety improvements. And that was a question that I had, is if someone hosts in their barn only one event a year, let's say it's for something like the Farm Bureau, hypothetically. What are the requirements to host that event? Does that now become its public assembly and it's governed by the life safety codes? No, okay.
Again, the way the law and the way the courts would look at this, what's the primary use of this? If you've spent $50,000 converting your barn into a place for conferences, the court's gonna say the primary use of that barn is now conferences. If you haven't done anything to your barn, and twice a year the Rurtans come once and the Farm Bureau comes once and you have a big shindig in the barn, that's not, you haven't changed the use of that barn.
And that was what I was referencing, because I know of a concrete case to where somebody had a barn, little stables, and they converted it from a barn, and they added a commercial kitchen, which received building inspections, but they never came through us. And that was a case. I mean, I called, I told the person they had to amend their special use permit for that, because when they do that, to me, it seems like, well, they're foregoing getting the zoning permit and going through the proper regulatory channels. And the man told me he's doing it for catered events related to the weddings. So for me as a zoning administrator, it's very difficult to say, well, we don't have this definition in here, this permitted use. I don't know how to respond with those things. I mean, if I could take a very hard line and say, it's not on here. And I know this board is not like that. I mean, I'll forgive my frankness, but I want to facilitate business as much as anybody else. But as a zoning administrator, I see the rules and regulations, and that's why I need guidance from you all on.
I mean, I guess I'm not having much problem with the agricultural side. I'm asking when I get C1 and C2, and I have a restaurant decides to hold a wedding on the weekend, does that come under this at all, or do they have, and why is that?
Because it's permitted, it's proposed to be permitted in the agricultural zoning district.
No,
Or are you talking
I'm
temporary?
talking the guy who's got a restaurant in a C1 or C2, does he have, and he wants to have a wedding, does he need to come in for a special use permit?
He
But
has
I'm
public
looking in the
assembly.
code, yeah.
He has public assembly.
Well, a restaurant, I would answer the question with a maybe.
Always a safe,
Well,
safe
and
answer.
let me give you my maybe. If he's running a restaurant 7 days a week, he's a restaurant. If all of a sudden he says, you know what, I'm gonna build a addition on my restaurant that'll seat 400 people and I'm gonna host weddings on the weekend,
Or a rock concert?
now he's no longer just a restaurant. He has now created an additional event on his
Understand,
restaurant.
but if it's a restaurant, he doesn't change the size of it, he's got a dance floor that he can host the wedding on,
Right.
You have to have a special use permit for that.
for what?
the dance floor. Correct, Greg?
We have the temporary or seasonal sales, and we have the special
I'm
events
certain.
under commercial.
That-
And
I'm just,
He's not changing his primary.
I mean,
use.
and I haven't
That's-
said that we don't need to do something, I just have a problem with the wording as it is right now.
well, how would you change?
I'm not opposed, well, I mean, like I say, I really want some time to think about it. We just got this, we've been arguing about this on the fly, but we didn't really get a chance to digest this.
Yeah, I mean, it might help if we separate it into two different pieces. The by right use, forget large or small for a moment. I think we should add a by right use for an event venue, a commercial event venue, much like the small definition. And I think we could get somewhere taking that approach. Now, do we, because of public concern, need to somehow limit the size or the frequency or the location or the zoning district or whatever at some scale? I don't think, I don't have an answer to that yet. Maybe, I agree with your maybe. If you said 10,000 people, then I probably could get to a yes pretty quick.
Yeah.
So maybe there is a number somewhere in there, but you know, if the special use kicks in only when the impact on the entire neighborhood, it could be dramatic, then I'm getting comfortable, and I think that's what we're after.
Right, again, this is just a work
And
session.
that's
This
what we
was just a
should, and that's
discussion.
what we should
Right,
be after.
that's-
Impact,
You've accomplished.
negative impacts is what we should be
And that's what I think, that's what.
working on.
And the small one,
In
I
my
think we can get there and sort of all agree that's not
By
a great
right, no
concern.
problems.
By right, no problem, but we should add it because right now we're never land. And but I'm concerned about the special use part of it because we got that thing sitting there called private that we don't really know what we're talking about.
Then we probably ought to have a definition for that before we go there.
Or roll it all into one thing. There's a special use if you're doing anything on a grand scale.
Believe it or not, Lee, really what I'm saying, and I maybe haven't made this clear, I think this is oversimplified, and we probably need to have more than just two definitions, in my opinion. There needs to, and there needs to be, and I lost my train of thought, so I'll shut up.
Well, I understand Jim's issue on the private cultural, I think.
Well,
there
yeah, I
needs to be-
understand that
That
too.
obviously needs to be defined in some way.
I mean, he was talking about like 10,000, I don't think anybody sitting here thinks that, 10,000 people is okay in Huntington.
No,
You know,
and I can even.
Private
argue
or
about-
commercial.
yeah,
That's
right.
right.
I can argue about the 100 on either side. I'm not a big locked into that number.
Well, maybe the thing we do is when the trigger for special use permit, we need a
That's one
definition.
of the things, special use permit, temporary use permit. I think we need to look at how we're using those.
And what triggers it, what triggers
Yeah,
each of those.
exactly.
And I think that's
the
the
training
next
outlaw.
step that we need to
Absolutely.
take.
Yeah.
The little things, by right, no problem, whether it's private, commercial, or
I think we need
whatever.
by right, temporary, and special use permit. I would see there are three different areas there.
By right.
Now, the question is, can we get there with?
Definitions on how you sort between
Right.
those three.
Exactly.
Well, the temporary, if I remember correctly, says 6 times or less a year. And Greg, you've got my code up there, but I think, don't we have for temporary, the definition is if you're doing it less than 6 times a year?
And that would cover, that would cover a lot of people. It wouldn't cover the bed and breakfast who's doing it every Sunday, certainly, or Saturday.
And I'm going by memory, but I think our temporary definition is less than 6 times.
Let's see if we're,
And the more, as we've discussed this, I guess the issue that I would like to try to get at is if there is construction or improvements involved, again, on a significant scale, that's the kind of thing that starts triggering an SUP in my mind. I mean, I hate SUPs to begin with. I've said that many times on the record, but
We're not required to have SUP.
I know,
We can make everything by right.
but we're not fixing our zoning ordinance, so we have to temporarily. But if there's a significant, either construction, renovation, or improvement involved, to handle these larger events. That's sort of the trigger, one of the triggering mechanisms for an SUP, it seems to me. I don't know
With,
that that
with
helps a lot.
regard to agricultural, do we have a sense of where we want to try to go? Do you have it, Greg, Tom?
I would,
I'm digesting.
what I'd like to do is to make sure that y'all are comfortable with the direction we're going, and I'd like to keep working on this as long as possible, so we're all on the same page and
I
understand.
agree with that.
We'll have to come back again.
Yeah.
I understand, I just wanna know, do we need,
There's
you know,
no time.
and then the other thing is
There's
that,
The
we're
use-
talking about in agricultural, and I'm concerned that, are we throwing more, because everything in C1 and C2 has to be by special use permit.
You can have the temporary seasonal sales and then the actual temporary use. And one of the protections, albeit minor, is regarding the hours of operation and if it's adjacent to residential, but it doesn't.
All I'm saying is, we have something that we're sort of moving on agricultural, but if I've got C1 and C2, I hate the idea of having to go special use permits for things that, and you may be able to explain that a restaurant or some of these other venues that you would find in a C1 or C2 would be able to do this within their allowed activity for that particular restaurant or whatever, and then we don't need a.
Well, one thing, we use, and
I'll defer
this
to you,
is
Brian.
an issue that you have and Jim has too, and I have a major issue with it. A special use permit in this county covers whatever. Typically, special use permits are for restaurants, hazardous material areas that the special use permits are typically for a year, and they get inspected to make sure that they are doing what they're supposed to be doing.
There's a public health or safety issue.
Exactly. And so, coming from an area that uses the special use permits for true life safety issues to where, because it's not something that's by right, it's difficult for me. It truly is.
Yeah, here it's a zoning category, basically.
Right.
Right,
Right.
and conditional use, special use, they're used interchangeably, but what they typically are is, even though it may be by right, there are potential uses as a restaurant that will have off-site impacts. This is really dealing with a special conditions, given the context of where it's physically located. And Lee, you had said something about restaurants and things. Well, yeah, inside the restaurant, I would agree.
Yeah, and I would not, and I would wanna make sure that just because we're trying to hold a wedding for 30 people inside of a restaurant, that we're not needing to go for a special use permit.
Agreed.
But if I'm building a new venue in a C1 or C2 area for weddings or rock concerts, then yeah, obviously, we would want a special.
Or if you're in a situation where a restaurant has enough parking to meet its demand, but because weddings are going to be, everybody come at one time and leave generally at the same time, the parking may be insufficient. They may be able to have outdoor music adjacent to restaurants, so that's where the special use may kick in.
So would you need that with, let's say, like a clubhouse in a private community that hosted?
You mean a gated community?
A gated
Yeah,
community that hosts many weddings, receptions, meetings.
I think it would
Dinners.
definitely be required of that, in that situation.
I'm just saying.
I mean, you're obviously struggling
Would you like to
where-
give me an address, Mr. Fraser? I'm gonna investigate this tomorrow.
You know, just
It's
hypothetically
complaint driven,
speaking.
right?
Is that what you're recommending?
I was purely hypothetically.
I think it was a complaint I heard.
Oh, hell.
And that is,
How about if we do this, I mean, there's obviously, what I heard from the board, and I'm taking all this in, is that one is to only regulate when necessary, and this is one of those gray areas but I also know right now we have an absence of regulation, so that if a adjoining property owner was adversely impacted by a venue that is commercial, its frequency is 15, 20, 30 times every weekend during spring.
Well,
through
even
fall.
one weekend, he can
Well,
come in and complain.
And right now, if that complaint comes in, then we've got to act on it, because there's absence of permission. We've got to deem it not permitted and enforce it accordingly. what we're trying, I guess this proposal is trying to get us in a place where we can allow these things to happen by right. And then the other threshold is to make sure that it doesn't adversely impact
Well, until we
Also-
put in the permitted uses, anything you wanna do, we're gonna have to spend some time defining.
And Mr. Frame, to answer your question regarding the uses in the commercial district, there's a caveat in C1 and C2 that provides for commercial activities that are not otherwise defined in this ordinance. And so, that, for me as an administrator, that allows me some flexibility. We don't have
Okay,
that with the
I just didn't wanna, if somebody wants to build something there for that, yeah, I would see that maybe you need a special use permit. But if we're trying to, if we have existing venues that can accommodate them, I don't wanna see them having to go through a special use permit just because they wanna hold a wedding or some other, private birthday party.
No, and I certainly don't want to regulate that, because I just don't want to do that.
just.
I forgot.
Y'all don't want me to do that.
Under the C1 special use permit, guess what we have? Private cultural recreational institutional.
And that is something that we need to,
Need
because I
to
think
define.
we do. I mean, we honestly need to do that. That's for another day, or maybe the same day.
I think we ought to, given we're trying to work this, I think we ought to work that in there as well.
Okay, so if, understanding time is drawing nigh, if this is item number 1 on the next work session, September 9th at 4 PM, to have Tom and Craig come back with kind of a
Well,
rework on this.
And we might need to see a paper flow between now and then. I mean,
Yeah.
to Mark's point, we can probably make some progress just with emails and paper flows and copies and comments,
All of which are subject to public.
Yeah, I mean, it all has to be,
Not if they're from me.
Oh, okay.
Well, and I can
that's right.
package my end, the items I have, and I can just give them to Tom, so we can just have that.
we have to get to the
comprehensive
point
flow.
where we're reacting to specific
Well-
words, and we can't do that.
We'll get some preliminary emails out to everybody by the end of the week or the very beginning of next week.
And just respond to you as far as.
Right, just
and
respond to me.
Okay.
You work through a drafting process culminating with the next work session where everybody at least has seen the latest draft and
Yep.
should have all the questions.
All right.
One other item, okay, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
No, I just wanted to move to that one last item. Work session.
Actually, 2 items.
Oh,
There's
okay.
3 more items.
Oh,
isn't there?
B.
Yeah.
You skip to B.
Financial policies? Okay.
I do just
You've
want
got
to
a
say
good-
thank you, this is a great idea. I think it's long overdue.
You've got 2 minutes.
One other thing, Mr. Chairman, we didn't get to the penalties or zoning violations in the preliminary class. The utilities, these work sessions, I think, are evident. So, we'll bring those back so that we'll keep the continuity. If you could put up I'll let Mr. White or Mr. Johnson kind of walk you through what we wanted to share with you on our work with the financial policies for the board. So, I'll pitch it to you.
Well, we had a meeting with Glenda and Brian and Mark and I, and tried to figure out where we're going with this. What is the need? And working in reverse, we recognized after talking about it and looking at it again, that even the reserve policy we have needs some attention. Exactly what needs to happen to it is yet to be determined, but there are some things that we need to understand and some things we might want to change. Given that is sort of a category of policy determinations, we identified 3 others, as you see in the center there. A revenue policy to include state, federal, as well as taxing at all levels. A debt policy, both long-term and short-term. And then an overall capital improvement plan and policy to include funding and so forth. And so the real work to be done is in the middle there, on those 4 policy topics. We hope to develop sort of an overall statement of financial or fiscal philosophy, if you will, much as we talked about at our retreat. I described it as the Goldilocks position, where we're not spending too much, we're not spending too little, we find that sweet spot is spending about right. Recognizing that as we move beyond this, that there will be any number of implementation policies and procedures that, that flow from the four main policy categories. But at the moment, without further direction, I think we're planning to try to refine and define 4 different policy categories, and maybe even an overall philosophy. Is that close to where we are, Mark?
I believe so, yes.
Very good.
Mr. Wise, Mr. Johnson, one point on the implementation policies. I think what we were talking about, the financial philosophy and then the 4 policies there are really policies of the board. Good, sound policies. The implementation policies are more for management of how we're going to get it done, and some of the budget authorizations you would grant me or the finance director to actually affect those policies, certainly in a transparent way where you all would know what's going on. Some of those policies are already into effect. We want to scrub procurement and budget transfers and things between departments so that I certainly have the flexibility, but also some discretion, but in a transparent way of being able to implement those policies on an ongoing basis throughout the year. So we're going to have like a phase 1 and a phase 2.
All right. We finished with our work session? All right. Let's call the regular meeting to order. Will you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Heavenly Father, we bow our heads and thank you for your love. Accept our thanks for the peace that yields this day and the shared faith that makes its continuance likely. Make us strong to do your work, willing to heed and hear your will, and write on our hearts these words: use power to help people. For we as elected officials are given power not to advance our own purposes, nor to make a great show in the world, nor a name. There is but one use of this power, and that is to serve people. Help us to remember it, Lord. Amen.
All right.
All right. We have the agenda. We did one item on the agenda, which was recently added, item 3F, the budget 14, fiscal year 14 budget transfers. I'd also like to pull from the consent agenda item G1. We will vote on that afterwards. And I'd also like to add to item number 9C, solicitation on public highways. Any other recommended changes to the agenda? Can I get a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Moves made and second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right. Could I get a motion on the consent agenda?
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Johnson, second.
Second.
Second by Mr. White. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay. And we will vote on the July 29th special meeting.
The minutes I move to approve.
Motion for Mr. White,
Second.
second for Mr. Crozier. Give me a roll call on this, please.
Mr. Goodwin, who is absent, Mr. Crozier,
Aye.
Mr. Frame,
Aye.
Mr. Johnson,
Abstain.
and Mr. White.
Aye.
All right. Okay, next on the agenda is our public appearance, presentation of resolution in recognition for Sam Martin.
Oh, I'm doing just fine, thank you.
That's
Where
good.
do you want me to stand?
You know, we don't recognize public service as often as we should. Public service is an honorable profession, and we have many people who serve at all levels of government. Sometimes at some levels, people tend to degrade public service, but I consider it an honorable and great profession, and you have done just a great job on this. I'm going to read this resolution, excuse me. A resolution of appreciation for Sabrina Sam Martin. Whereas Sabrina Sam Martin has capably served the citizens of the towns of Orange and Gordonsville for over 24 years, and whereas Ms. Martin has demonstrated exemplary leadership during her tenure with the towns of Orange and Gordonsville, and whereas it is noteworthy that Ms. Martin faithfully and with great distinction served as Gordonsville Town Manager for over 9 years, and whereas Ms. Martin, while serving as Town Manager, assisted with making the water billing system more efficient, which enabled the town to minimize water rate increases, along with developing, implementing, and managing other innovative programs and services. And whereas Ms. Martin also recently spearheaded the improvement of the town's financial management system and secured over $2.5 million in grant funding for various community projects, the most significant being the Main Street Streetgate project slated to be constructed in late summer of 2014. Now, therefore, be it resolved on this 12th day of August 2014 that the Orange County Board of Supervisors hereby extends its appreciation, gratitude, and admiration to Ms. Martin for her dedicated service and for her years of hard work and positive results. Signed and sealed this 12th day of August, S. Teal Goodman, Chairman, Orange County Board of Supervisors. Congratulations. Again, thank you for your service.
Thank you very much.
Next, a resolution of appreciation for Alistair Bank. Oh, you good. Mark, you want to come up here with us?
I'll get you.
Right here. Right between us.
Jim, she's gonna get you too.
In spades.
One of the things that Alice, with all of her service to the sheriff's office, I mean, we're seeing problems across the country, out in Missouri, with a lack of trust and commitment between the law enforcement and the servants that they serve and protect, or the public citizens they serve and protect. And one of the things is volunteers like Alice and the programs like the Citizens Police Academy that merge the law enforcement and our citizens on a regular basis, I think are just tremendous and really help build the kind of cohesion that we need. Mark, do you have any comments you'd like to make? I'll just catch you off guard.
Alice is a wonderful person. She has been dedicated to our office. She's now dedicated to Diana's office. And she's just been a super person to work with.
All right.
You lie well down, I'll take care.
A resolution of appreciation for Alistair Bant. Whereas Alistair Bant has faithfully and with great honor served as a volunteer for the Orange County Sheriff's Office since 2008, and whereas Mr. Bant consistently volunteers her time at least one day a week with the Victim Witness Program, and whereas Mr. Bant dedicates countless hours to the greater good of the Sheriff's Office and to the County of Orange, often transcribing videotaped interviews for criminal cases, assisting with fundraising efforts for the Citizens Police Academy, and has always been willing to take on any project with enthusiasm. Now, therefore, be it resolved on this 26th day of August 2014 that the Orange County Board of Supervisors and the Orange County Sheriff's Office hereby extends their appreciation, gratitude, and admiration to Mr. Bant for her unswerving and selfless service to the County of Orange. Signed and sealed this 26th day of August 2014 as Teal Goodwin, Chairman.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for all of the work you've been doing.
attractive audience that came to sneak in behind you, so.
Do you wanna make any remarks, Alice? You may if you'd like.
All right, I will.
Okay, please.
It's my chance.
Uh-oh.
I have to tell you that working with all of these people, the sheriff's office, the Commonwealth Attorney's office, and Carolyn Lab, has really been an exceptional experience for me. They have jerked my chain more times than you can imagine, but I'm from New York, and so I give it back equally as well. But I thank them all, and I'm very fond of the whole group.
By the way, Carolyn wanted to be here, but she couldn't, so.
I'll get her.
Okay.
Okay, next on our agenda is the update from the Foothills Housing Corporation. Mr. Reed, Executive Director.
Mr. Chairman, we don't see Mr. Reed.
All right.
If he should come later on, then we can maybe make.
Okay, we'll incorporate it later if he's,
pass-
if he
pass
gets
this
here.
by.
All right. Next is the public comment. Do we have anybody signed up for public comment?
No, sir.
What?
No, sir.
None? All right. Any members of the board want to have a comment?
Yes.
All right.
First off, I'd like to just reiterate what you said about the service for our volunteer people in the county and everything. We'd be a lot harder pressed to make things happen without the citizens volunteering. Also, regarding the comments you made about public service and the things happening in other places, I feel that this board would be very remiss if we did not at least make a public statement regarding some of the reported press from the Central Virginia Regional Jail dealing with a inmate passing away. And I do not feel personally that it was handled in a professional nor caring manner. Even if it was to protect the individual, these people are public servants. They are here to serve all of the citizens, both the citizens within the correctional facilities as well as the citizens that are not. And we don't have a direct line regarding the Central Virginia Regional Jail. We are one of the jurisdictions that's involved with it. We're currently putting a lot of extra money into it for the expansion of the jail, and I feel that our citizens absolutely deserve to know that each and every one of them count, and the reported comments just are not acceptable.
Okay. All right. Any other?
Yeah, I would echo what Jim said. The comments that were attributed to the superintendent were extremely unprofessional. Were not comments that someone who's in that position should ever utter. I would also go a step farther and say that the letter that was sent out to the Daily Progress by the lawyer for the jail was also, in my opinion, very lacking. And it talks about that his comments have to be considered in the proper context. There is nothing in that letter which suggests that the comments were incorrectly reported. It just says they have to be taken in the proper context. But there really is no proper context for, quote, I could care less how the public feels about it, end of quote. There is no proper context for that. Playing games with whether the reporter asked the exact proper question. The reporter apparently asked if there had been 2 deaths, and since there had only been 1, he chose to say no, there hasn't been 2 deaths. So he was in his mind technically correct, but he was wrong in every other way. So someone in the position that he is in, one would certainly hope that they would have the professionalism and the understanding that these types of comments are not acceptable. So it in my mind raises grave concerns about the suitability of someone who would make those comments to hold that position.
Yeah, Mark Amos, our sheriff, is on the board of directors of the Central Virginia Regional Jail.
I'm going to speak as Sheriff Orange County and one member of the Central Virginia Jail Board. I agree with both of you 100%. Those comments were inappropriate, and I was as mad as I could possibly be when I read them. I was the one who contacted the majority of the jail board members to find out their opinions, and they did not agree with it also. It was left up to meetings could not be scheduled to get a joint comment, so it was left up to the attorney to prepare a statement. There was an apology in there, but I will tell you from the sheriff of this county, I was extremely upset about the comments, and that it is not my opinion. This county, and I hope the jail itself, feels that we are here to protect the public, and the public's opinion does care. So I'm speaking for myself. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
All right. Any other board comments? Okay, let's move on to our action items. First item is the award of the contract for landfill operations. Stephanie?
Good evening. Staff released a competitively negotiated solicitation for landfill operations on June 19th. We advertised this on the county website, the state website, and the local paper. We received a total of 3 responses. The selection committee and the solid waste committee got together to review the responses and feel at this time it is most advantageous to enter into an agreement with RM Soderquist. Mr. Soderquist's proposal meets the requirements of the solicitation while demonstrating value in customer service, quality of service, and a cooperative, team-oriented philosophy. The cost of services is $72,000 a month and 5 cents a gallon for leachate removal, and funds have been budgeted for this in FY15's budget. It is the recommendation that we enter into a 1-year agreement with the possibility of 4 1-year renewals. The fees will be locked in for the first 2 years, and beginning in years 3 and any subsequent year thereafter, they shall not increase more than 2.5% a year.
Any questions?
I move to approve.
Motion by Mr. White. Do I have a second?
I will second it.
Second by Mr. Crozier. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Next one is the engineering services for VDOT MAP 21 grant application for Montpelier Trail project.
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, as you know, at your May meeting and then again on July 8th, staff came to you with I guess, movement on a project that had been identified as part of your work program at the retreat, looking at and seeing if there were opportunities to start developing economic development projects for agritourism or visitor as well as local use, and the trails project certainly fit that bill. Talked with Mr. Johnson, but I certainly let him know that Ms. Abs was one of putting this idea, particularly at this particular location, forward. Mr. Goodwin also has been working with me and others in keeping this I guess process moving forward. As you all know, this project is generally looking at a location of a trail running from near Prospects Heights Middle School across some private property, and then connecting with an existing trail network at Montpelier. Kat Imhoff, and I don't have a letter in hand. I did indicate in my board report that I would have that in hand today, and I have not received it. I know she's on vacation this week, and and evidently something fell through in getting it done before she left. I will follow up, because she gave me every assurance that she would put it in writing to you. They see, they're very supportive of this. It's an idea of how to enhance their, refocusing on their mission and how to better use the 2,500 acres out there, and if there was another access from another location. The principal property owners along this corridor I've met with personally, as well as Mr. Goodwin, and they are certainly supportive at this process. This doesn't commit anybody to any course of action, but what we need to do is to be able to secure some funding to start answering questions as to costs, viability, and our architects, Wiley Wilson, are pretty comfortable with the VDOT process, and this process would fund this master planning process. This is not construction funds. If we pursued construction, then under at least this grant, VDOT would come in and fund 80% of the capital cost, but we have to go through their process to be eligible for that construction money. The last thing is that there is potentially also some Department of Conservation recreational funds that could help with construction of this. So this is not a 100% funded capital project from county resources. I think there's another agenda item that gets to the economic impact of tourism and visitor related, that this asset certainly would be an attraction for folks to come to the county, as well as for county residents to use. So what we have before you two is and last thing is, the cost of the study is in there. It's this would be helping us to prepare the application. The cost is, let me get down here, $6,900. They have prepared these applications before, and we definitely need their engineering, because the application is going to have to at least speak to some engineering just to request the master planning money. The last point is that the money is available in reprogramming some capital funds that are already that were committed for a rewrite of the zoning ordinance. Mr. Zodi certainly indicated that that's not going to be undertaken. Those funds are available for this type of planning activity. So with that, I'll certainly answer any questions. I know gentleman representative from Wiley Wilson is here, as well as Kurt Hildebrand, who will be the project lead on this stage.
Any questions for Brian?
I have a question. I'm trying to understand the process. I guess my question is, to what degree will we have either a design or a description or whatever that is part of the submission for the grant? I mean, how much information, how much detail will we have at the time the grant application is made? Because the grant itself looks like it does design more of the design work potentially. So help me understand where we are in the various phases.
Yes, Supervisor White. My name is Tim Wagner. I'm with the architectural engineering firm of Wiley Wilson. We're based in Lynchburg, Virginia. What this project is to assist Orange County prepare the grant application, which is due November 1st, to procure the fundings to do a more intensive evaluation of the trails system, as David described, as Brian described. And there is some level of preliminary work that we have to do, gather background information, prepare conceptual maps, meet with key property owners, which is critical. If the property owners, that way you fill out any potential negativity early on, make sure all your property owners are on board before you apply for the funding. Mapping, cost estimates as to how much we would have to ask VDOT for the actual construction, and then help prepare a draft resolution for the Board of Supervisors, because that has to be included with the application, as well as it would be basically by the resolution coming in front of the board, that would be your public hearing, which also helps you support your funding application. And the county. Kurt has already taken part in some online training, and we thank him for taking one for the team because it was rather extensive. And so that's something that helps us score points in our grant application. But this sets the stage, does the preliminary legwork to get us more funding to move forward with feasibility study to identify the most practicable route for this trail system. And then that allows us to go ahead and get the construction funds.
So you'll be able to show let me ask a better question. The property owners involved, or potentially involved, will be able to have at least some indication as to the route, the impact on their property, and so forth, prior to or as part of the application process.
That is
Okay,
correct.
that's what I was
We would have
trying-
mapping as part of the application process that we would put in front of the property owners to say, this is, probably show more than one alternative, say, this is one alternative, this is another alternative.
And do we need at least some form of an agreement from those property owners prior to submitting the grant?
I think what we're going to do is get, I guess, letters of support, certainly from Montpelier. There is a parcel owned by the school board, and they're aware and supportive of us going in. And then there's a family and individual property owners, same family that own the intervening parcels. We would get letters of support for them to proceed. So we get documentation of support. Letter of support is not, and understand, it's not a commitment. It's just, they are very interested in seeing how this might be able to be developed, understanding of two caveats. One, it can't adversely impact their current use of the property, or two, impact the future development potential of it, that the residue, that this project only enhances the value of their property rather than detract it. And I think based on some preliminary conversations I've had with the engineers, as well as Mr. Goodwin and I have had with the property owners, I think on a couple of the alignments we can achieve all those. And they were very interested in exploring those alignments further.
And down the road, this would be routed more through the Parks and Rec Foundation development of it, or how much are we looking at for actual quote-unquote taxpayer funds for the development of this?
We're going, this is part of the process, is to see how many other state level dollars we can leverage. There will be a general fund commitment. I don't want to misrepresent anything on the construction side, as well as there's an understanding on the operation and maintenance. And so we will try to dial in what that commitment is way up ahead before you all proceed. But something of this level, there are a lot more questions that we frankly have good answers for, and to try to speculate is in this level of capital investment is probably not advisable.
Any other questions?
Is Kurt going to be required to do a bunch more online training?
I think he's completed it.
Can I get a motion?
I so move that.
Okay,
we proceed.
motion by Mr. Crozier. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Johnson. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you, gentlemen. We will certainly keep you apprised as we go. We will come back with a completed application, and I also have shared with Dr. Tanner that we would do likewise with the school board, as well as Montpelier Foundation folks, and also property owners.
All right, next item is the proposed economic and fiscal impact for tourism. Mr. Davis.
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, we'll come to you with a proposal coming out of your Tourism Advisory Committee. Just as we were working through this Trails project, your Tourism Advisory Committee has been working to move maybe to another level. As you all know, it was convened close to 20 industry sector, the lodging, hospitality, historical attractions, and so forth, the wineries, that were convened about a year ago as an information sharing group, basically just to convene them and start sharing information. They have worked hard, but when I started getting involved with the group, probably in the late winter, it was kind of getting to a point of, okay, what do we do next, and how do we maybe take a more formal role in advising this board on how to grow the tourism and hospitality and lodging businesses in the county. And so they're was trying to get some resources to this group. I came to you as part of the budget cycle to ask to reprogram some money from Louisa County that we've been contributing for the Visitor Center there in Zion's Crossroads to allow this group to at least have some seed money. You approved that. I gave notice to my counterpart, Mr. Goodwin in Louisa. We're working through a notice period, so we're going to pay them through the end of October because there are some personnel that could be impacted by this. And Louisa County's board is looking whether they're going to backfill this or also look to Fluvanna County for some additional money. But also part of this, the committee felt pretty motivated to work on a strategic plan. There had been one done in 2010. I think there, by general consensus, there's areas for improvement on that plan and updating and more, kind of taking a more holistic look at tourism development, economic development in the county. With that, they've agreed to undertake a strategic planning process, and that'll be kicked off in January to update the plan and really expand it. It'll be facilitated by Virginia Tourism Corporation. There are grant funds, no local match, that Lee, our tourism manager, has gotten a commitment, right, Lee, with that. The other part of I guess, the basis to elevate the work of this committee is twofold. One, they've gone through some leadership reorganization. Jay Billy, who's here, has been, I guess, elected as chair. And Jay is coming certainly with a lot of real world corporate experience, certainly being a bed and breakfast operator here. But I think based on our conversations and some emails he sent out to the group, really is motivated to kind of move this to another level. Mr. Frame is you all's liaison to this committee. So with that, one of the first points of entry into the strategic planning process is get better data. Right now, the tourism fiscal impact in the county and economic impact, fiscal being tax revenue, economic being the economic jobs and investment that those dollars that visitors spend, is really put forward by, it's part of the state tourism analysis. And an economist that I have done work with over the years, Dr. Mangum, did some digging and finding out what were the inputs for Orange County. How do they come to the 40,500,000 jobs? And they hire a consultant out of Tennessee to do that, and it really was difficult for him to figure out what the inputs were. And so he didn't put a lot of, I guess, faith in those numbers, because he's always impressed upon me, the more granular you get, the more difficult it is to project. And so understanding that data is good of figuring out what the impact is for tourism here and to build a proper strategic plan. The committee is proposing to engage Dr. Mangum to do a fiscal and economic impact study. The cost of this is $10,000. This would be a model, survey-based model, where we would survey existing establishments that are in the tourism sector. It would be confidential. There'd be non-disclosure agreements, legally binding non-disclosure agreements between the business and Dr. Mangum. We would not see that data. And from that, he will develop a model that we then could update. We would own the model and be able to date this in periodic, in certain periods of time. This information, I think, would help give some guidance to the tourism committee. I'll stop there, but we've, again, the planning and zoning rewrite ordinances, my ready to go to as a funding source for this type of work. But I think what we're trying to do at the end of the day is the county spending upwards of $200,000 now out of the general fund for tourism and tourism promotion as economic development. This will hopefully, this will dial in what the return on investment is. For every dollar put in by the county, the return, I'm pretty comfortable we'll say it's an exponential, 1.5 times, 2 times, 3 times the investment. I'll stop there. I don't know whether Jay's here to answer any question, I guess, from his perspective as well.
I would add another comment is, not only do we get a better idea of what our return on investment is, but we may be able to understand a little bit about which areas are producing the best return in terms of investment. Understanding which areas of the county's money produces the best return. And so that's a little bit, little more in-depth, and I'm not sure, and we can't get that from state data.
Yeah, the one question I have is it appears that this is very much dependent on the participation of our local businesses that are involved with tourism, and I'm concerned that I asked the question, and we apparently at this point don't have a sense of their interest or their willingness to participate, and I'm a little concerned that we don't have any ability to sort of throttle this process. If we find out that the response is very high and people are very enthusiastic about it, then I think we can do an analysis and get reasonable results. If we get a very poor response, I'm not sure that we should take a limited response and go all the way through the process of develop the model, do the modeling and so forth, because we won't have a reliable answer. And so I guess I would like to see a step that somehow either gives us a greater assurance that we're going to get a good response from our local businesses, and or waits until we do, or something that gives us more confidence that we have sufficient data to have a reliable read on both the fiscal, the economic impact, and the rates of return and the like. I mean, if I'm reading it correctly, it only works if we have some reasonable degree of participation.
Absolutely. I think that's a problem we've had in the past as well, is we haven't had appropriate participation, I guess is the.
That is a genuine concern. I mean, participation rates in any survey that you do is always a big issue. For this survey, all the board members will sign a letter and to encourage participation, and we'll all sign it. And again, all the members of the board, we're talking wineries, everybody's represented, and we'll even go so far as to for each person, I represent the bed and breakfast. I will definitely contact the bed and breakfast and tell them that this is really important. I filled it out. Mine is sent in, and I'm encouraging everybody else, because we're dead in the water if we don't. We really need to find out this information to find out where we are, where we're going, how much money our tourism department can support us, or how much, and et cetera. So it really gives us, there's a lot of benefit for the businesses to go ahead and do this. And we're really on the cutting edge, because I don't know if there's any jurisdiction that's ever gone this route, but this study is really important to help us as we go forward. So we're gonna be stressing those issues.
Do we have any sense of the level of participation that is needed by the modeling effort to give us the kind of confidence that we would want? I mean, has there been discussions with?
There has been no discussions, but I'm sure it's going to be broken out some well, it's all going to be a function of the research director and how he segments, has a segmentation of the different industries, okay? For example, wineries and et cetera, are they going to be all grouped with other businesses? So, or other type of businesses,
Yeah,
like wineries and wine shops or whatever. So,
right. In some of those segments, though, you almost need 100% participation, because there aren't that large of a number of
right.
Depending on again how he segments, and so I guess that. But it sounds like that you've addressed that, at least to the point of the advisory committee recognizes that you're going to have to.
This is the biggest challenge of the study.
Yeah.
There's no doubt. Yeah.
And the elements of providing protection for the individual's data, so it isn't. I mean, we're not going to see at our level, we're not gonna see what the individual businesses have submitted. We will see a collection of it so that their private financial data is kept secure.
Yes,
what-
confidentiality will be secured.
Yeah, and we'll have
Sure.
legally binding non-disclosure agreements that it'll be the two parties, the economist and the business. Let me maybe speak to what Mr. White is saying, and this may be a way to address this in the scope of work. Certainly, there's will be expense to come up with a survey instrument and the plan of the research. We could pay for the survey instrument and then actually commission the survey. And then the second phase would be contingent on having a sufficient sample size. And so that we wouldn't be committed for him to analyze it unless there's sufficient sample size. And I think I can work with him on getting a scope that's structured so that the expense is on the front end of getting the survey done. But if we can't roust up enough participation, then we're under no obligation to complete the project.
Or we have a flexible schedule such that we can, if we need to wait and do a little bit more, persuading or arm twisting or whatever it takes to get the responses, then.
More of in other words, a larger campaign to get
Yeah,
cooperation.
Right, I mean, I would, we need some safety mechanism there to get us the data. And I guess that's my concern. We don't.
And as Jay and I talked, is that, for me, I'll certainly advocate and support and do what I can, at least as county administrator, to the business community of participating. But I think having their peers and other businesses go and saying, I'm doing it, this is important, I would hopefully convince.
One of the concerns that I have is when the survey is done, how the different industries get credited for the dollars and the people. And one example would be one of the two wine festivals at Montpelier. Montpelier's going to want their share of the revenue and the people. The wineries and the other vendors are going to want their fair share. So we need to make sure that we do get to a very granular stage where we can see it can be credited to both Montpelier and to the wineries and the vendors, but it has to be clear the total dollar amount and what venue those dollars are accounted to or those people are accounted to.
Double counting.
Right, I know with past things and, I'll use the battlefields as one example. I'm sorry, I've never seen a report yet that I can believe on the battlefields. They're great to have, they're a wonderful resource for this county.
But we don't get 70,000 people a year.
I'm sorry, throwing a traffic counter across Route 20 does not justify, people going to the battlefields.
No.
So that's where my concern is that the information that's brought in is truly dissected in the right manner.
And the situations like you just described are gonna have to be spoken with and talked about up front. In other words, with the Montpelier Wine Festival, we're talking about, wineries, as far as they're concerned, they're going to the wine festival here, there, in county, out of county, all those are gonna take into consideration. But as far as double dipping, the Chamber of Commerce gets money from that, the winery gets money from that, Montpelier gets money from that. So those are all gonna be, those alliances and deals or arrangements are all gonna have to be made up front on a lot of that. There's a lot of prep work to do before this all happens, but again, I think day one, the first thing we're gonna attack is confidentiality and how do we get agreement to get the information. That'll be priority number one. Priority number two is setting up a system in which we will get clean information. So.
Okay, any further questions? Can I get a motion?
I'll make the motion.
Motion by Mr. Crozier, do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Johnson. Any further discussion?
I mean, we've had a lot of talk here, and I want to make sure that's what's been said and sort of a consensus here is built into this motion.
Well, that was my hesitation is, okay, I'm fine with the motion, but.
That's why I did it, because I knew we were gonna have conversations.
I would think there's a way to know up front if we've got a train wreck happening. I would think before we get into very much expense, we're gonna know if there's, if we get one winery and 3 bed and breakfast and that's all we get, then we're gonna know we have a problem, and we certainly don't wanna spend $10,000
Or even design a survey.
crunching number. Well, yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying. I mean, I'm assuming that, I know I shouldn't assume, but I'm assuming that we're going to know fairly early in the process.
Well, I think, and I'll look to Jay, but I think if we asked a business, would you participate in a confidential survey that asks questions about payrolls, goods and services that you would buy, maybe might be the response, and we could certainly show a draft non-disclosure agreement and things. I think until we get to a level of actually showing the questions of the information and how that would be assigned to different industry classifications for these. So I think, if we're needing to go out and test the waters on the interest, I think we did some of that work as part of the committee, given the folks that were around the table seeing the benefit in it.
But one of my concerns is that in addition to the question of willingness to participate or concern about confidentiality, I'm not sure that some of this data is actually captured the way that it would have to be captured to answer the questions that you're trying to answer. Jay's comment about, or I guess you're leading about the wineries and the wine festivals and things in county and out of county and sharing with this and sharing with that. Maybe some of them do that level of record keeping or analysis as a matter of course, but some probably don't, and maybe with some work and some analysis and maybe even spending money on their accountants and things, they can do it. So this might not be that just as simple as,
Sending out a questionnaire.
sending out a questionnaire. So I like the idea, but I don't want a train wreck either. I want to do something that people are prepared to do, willing to do, have the information to do, or willing to spend the money to get the information.
Well, I guess I'll make another assumption. My assumption is if Brian's recommending that we go with Dr. Mango, that he's done this before and knows how to go about it, so that assuming he gets participation, he'll be able to. I think there's probably in some businesses there's got to be some extrapolation done. You're not going to be able to get down and get it all there. There's going to have to be some. Well, I sold this many and we did this much, and therefore that means this. There's got to be some there, because you're not going to be able to trace every. No business keeps that level of.
Bed and breakfast may not know how many bottles of Orange County wine he sold.
Yeah, that's a good example. And of course, I would imagine that when it comes to alcohol, actually, that's one area that there probably are.
There might be better records than that.
Pretty ridiculous.
I was gonna say, the wineries,
They
by
got to
virtue.
They got to keep some pretty good records.
Yeah, in this example, wineries and wine fests, you know what? They're going to have to evaluate whether they're worth it going to these places. So they're keeping tabs on that. Also, if we're going to ask restaurants, what percentage of your people are tourists, let's say, down to the light well. Well, you know what? They probably don't keep track of that. However, they're probably the best to give us a good estimate as to what percentage, okay? That's the best we have. And really, that's going to be a better estimate than anybody walking on the street. So we're going to have a much better idea, even though it's not going to be a finite number that they can go to their books, but it's going to be probably pretty dead on. It's going to be pretty close. So
There's another thing, is that the level of information that Dr. Mangum, as he explained to me, is directly correlated to participation. The more detailed, the more lengthy it gets, the less likely that folks will participate. And his he speaks of what's called the in-plan model, and it's an econometric model that costs a lot of money to have the license for and use. And it is I've seen it work, it's a pretty sophisticated model that with few inputs of, gross sales per month, number of employees, payroll, that then imputes a whole lot of data. And so I think the idea of getting the survey instrument as kind of a step one, seeing if it works for the businesses, and we test the waters. If it appears that the web-based survey is not, the survey questions are not sufficient, or businesses are telling us, I wouldn't participate in that, then we need to go regroup. And Fletcher's very flexible about this kind of things. If we get commitments from companies to participate, then that would be the second step, is that we go ahead and follow through.
Brian, is there a mechanism here? Let's say winery A answers every question on the survey. Say winery B says, no, I'm not going to do that. I will give you 2 figures here. Does he have the ability to extrapolate that and make an assumption that winery B's numbers are going to be statistically fairly close to winery A's? Does he have that ability? And I don't know how detailed this survey is.
I don't know. I can't answer that. I only know from past experiences that data gathering is not an exact science, and so some of it you have to smooth. And Jay did this for a living, and so there are statistical ways of normalizing that data. He will also be using some national kind of coefficients in this from some data sets he already owns or has access to.
I'm assuming too that if he comes across a set of numbers that look really out of whack, he's going to go back to the entity that gave him those numbers and double check those numbers.
Yeah, I think if something looks like an error, I mean, just
70,000 or so.
or 700 million when really it was probably 70,000. But the web-based survey should guard against that kind of, unless the input was just way off. But I share your concern, because as any survey, if you're making policy decisions based on a survey, the rigor of that survey is real key to making good policy decisions. But right now, the only survey, the data that we have is the states, and I think there's general consensus that that's not of any use.
Well, again, I would say that the only, as long as we have an understanding up front that if there's some, and I don't think this, I don't foresee this happening, but if there is a train wreck,
we need that safety in
let's jump off into the bushes as quick as we can, but I really don't think that that's probably going to happen.
Yeah, I guess what I would ask for is that there's some additional implementation planning that goes on between staff and the advisory committee and maybe the economist to sort of make sure we're ready, we've done the things we need to be done, and we have the business community prepared to accept this. I mean, that's not an explicit step in his tasking, but I think it's one that we need to have. And with that understanding,
I'll leave you with this. I mean, we're here as staff to support the Tourism Advisory Committee, but this is an initiative that then moves into a strategic planning process. So I'm really looking to the folks around that table to take lead on all this.
I think we're willing to do whatever we need to even pre-sell the concept of going out and asking you for this information. So.
Okay. Any more questions or comments? Okay. All in favor, say aye.
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 Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you, gentlemen. I do appreciate you.
Thank you, Jay.
Thank you.
For this. And we'll come back with, I guess, status reports as we move forward.
Okay.
To avoid that.
Next item. Carry forward request from FY 14 to 15. Brenda?
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, in your agenda package is the request for carry forwards from FY 14 into FY 15. And as you recall, we do this every year. There are a number of projects and grants that are ongoing that cross the end of the fiscal year, and we're carrying the funds forward. This year's carry forward request for the general fund is about half of what it was last year. And we've tried to, really scrub the request and make sure that they are for legitimate projects, that they're not just requests for ongoing operation expenditures. But in reviewing the request, the county administrator had requested that several of the requests be approved for carry forward, but as an additional safeguard, be placed in a county administrator's contingency so that if the circumstances arose as the department head thought they may, that those funds could then be dispersed to the department. And they are included on your list. They're for things like there were some part-time wages, I think, in the electoral or registrar's budget that may or may not be needed depending on the election cost and all that. There were some things in the IT budget that also fell into that category. I think it's a total of about 30,000 in those kinds of requests that we just, we didn't feel so strongly that these events were going to happen, but at the same time, the department heads had good foresight in thinking they may happen, and we wanted to give them that flexibility. Were there any particular ones that you had questions on?
Just glad it's half of what it was last year.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Motion by Mr. White. Do I have a second?
Second.
Motion, second by Mr. Johnson. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you.
All right, appointments to boards, commissions, and committees. Anybody have any appointments to make?
I do not.
Hearing none, let's go. I noticed a note here from Skyline Cap that the other localities appointed a board member to go to this thing. Can we all move back and leave the last guy standing? All right. It's the fourth Monday, 6:30 to 8:30, every fourth Monday is the meeting, so, good, all right.
And where is that?
I don't know where, I suspect they're at the Madison, at the Madison office. But, all right.
Closest supervisor would be the one to go, if that was the case.
With friends like that, Mark, huh?
Actually, it might be Teal. He's not here. That would be.
Well, that.
The Tourism Advisory Committee, is there someone that's working on that? Is there, do these people want to be reappointed? What's the situation on that?
I think
Have these people been contacted? Can they
Yeah.
serve
Frank?
again? And
Yeah, I think we're going through a process right now.
Oh, okay.
Hello, gentlemen. Yes, we have talked to all of the individuals who are up for reappointment, and most of them did accept reappointment. We had 3 vacancies, well, 2 vacancies that came about. We had nominees from the Tourism Advisory Committee that the group had nominated. We reached out to those individuals. Actually, 3 of the 4 nominees accepted, so we made 1 more spot on the Tourism Advisory Committee to accommodate that extra person. So everyone has been contacted.
And so what we'll do is we'll come back with a roster for you all to just to ratify. They're kind of a self-appointed industry group. Mr. Frame is on.
Yeah. I mean, we'll come back with a whole roster as opposed to individuals. I mean, if anybody's got somebody that is anxious to serve, please let us know.
But as I recall, we set this up. These are not board supervisor appointments. These are
Correct.
appointed by
The group
the group
was
itself.
the group was formed by the Board of Supervisors with the blessing of the Board of Supervisors, but when it came time to put the actual individuals on the board, the supervisors decided that y'all didn't want to have to appoint 16 different people to the Tourism Advisory Committee, that you would leave that to us, and that we would just keep you updated as those nominations came and.
It's really an
and
information item for us then.
Correct.
Right.
But as I'm assuming, as we go forward, and Brian and I have discussed this, as the budget money becomes available to this group, we will have to reform this group and make them into a more formal group, and then we can readdress that at that time if you feel so necessary.
All right.
Okay, so really they shouldn't be on this list then?
Right, we're gonna update this, and,
Okay.
and I think this was just a
Now,
carry.
on the youth commission, I see there's an at-large, Ms. Irving does wish to be reappointed, so does that need to be done?
If you wanna take that action tonight, you can do so.
Okay, well, I would nominate Shirley Irving to serve another term on the youth commission.
All right. Any other nominations? All in favor, say aye.
Aye?
Aye.
Knocked one out. Journeyed 1,000 miles.
I know. That's what some of these are.
All right, next item. Well, it's 6 o'clock.
Mr. Chairman, if I can make a recommendation, we've just got county attorney items. I think if we can maybe work through the state budget briefing, I will, the briefing I was gonna give as part of the budget discussion or presentation for the school board contains a lot of the same material. And so if
Okay.
you just bypass that into the school board meeting, could take care of that, and then the other two, I think we may be able to knock out here fairly quickly. Before closed meeting.
Okay, we can do the state budget briefing at the school?
Yes, sir.
And what about your GWAP plan?
I'm just gonna, the information is in the board's package,
Okay.
and I
Then
think.
let's pick up on the solicitation on the public highways. You-
As you recall, at the last meeting, we discussed a possible ordinance prohibiting 3 things: soliciting, passing out handbills and literature, and selling along the public highway. The discussion at the board level was we don't necessarily want to ban passing out materials, and we're not wanting to ban all solicitation, only certain groups. And so I was tasked with going to look and see what we could and couldn't do. Ironically, the very next day, I saw a new federal case that came out and dealt exactly with this issue. And what the federal court said is that that's a violation of free speech if you're only banning solicitation by certain people. Because what the court said was, the local government said, well, it's a public safety issue. And the court said, well, is it more safe to pass out handbills than to solicit? That's your public safety argument is bogus. You either got to ban all activity there along the highway, or you're discriminating against certain kinds of speech and activity. So to answer a question that was sort of proposed last time,
We can't.
it's an all or nothing approach. We'll either have to ban all activity along the highway, or we'll have to allow. We can't do it piecemeal.
Give them a canopy down there, right between the entrance and the exit.
But you'll need a special use permit, 'cause that's a public gathering. That's a venue.
Is anybody interested in pursuing this?
No.
Okay.
I don't see a way to do it that makes any sense.
All right. Okay, then there's no need to pursue that any further. All right. Next, any questions on the IT items or the committee reports? Okay, well, why don't we go into recess? Will you read
All right.
read the words, please?
All right, well, whereas the Board of Supervisors of Orange County desires to discuss in closed meeting the following: consultation with legal counsel pertaining to actual or probable litigation where such consultation open meeting would adversely affect the negotiating or litigating posture of the public body, and consultation with legal counsel employed or retained by the public body regarding specific legal matters requiring the provision of legal advice by such counsel. And whereas pursuant to section 2.237A7 of the Code of Virginia, such discussions may occur in closed meeting. Now therefore be it resolved that the Board of Supervisors of Orange County does hereby authorize discussion of aforesaid matter in closed meeting.
Who's making the motion?
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Johnson, seconded by Mr. Crozier. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We are hereby recessed.
Are we ready, Allison?
Yes, sir.
All right, to the best of your knowledge, were the only matters discussed in the closed meeting, public business matters lawfully exempted from open meeting requirements, that only such public business matters as were identified in the motion by which the closed meeting was to be heard, discussed, or considered in a closed meeting, need a roll call.
Mr. Frame,
Aye.
Mr. Johnson,
Aye.
Mr. Crozier,
Aye.
Mr. Goodwin, who is absent, and Mr. White.
Aye. All right. Okay, next item on the agenda is our public hearing for a proposed ordinance amendment to strike subparagraph C from the ordinance eliminating the provision that a member of the Board of Supervisors shall serve as a liaison to the Planning Commission. Okay, Brian, do you have anything you want to say?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, slick the switch here. There was a email sent out from a couple of the planning commissioners about this item, asking their fellow commissioners to make a comment, and if they wanted to make a comment, to be communicated to the board, to send those comments to me, and I would do so. I received one comment from Jason Compel saying essentially to the effect that the liaison is important, but sitting up on the dais and things may not, I think I can read you what the email, but that was kind of creates a difficulty for the Planning Commission to maintain their independence, and that the active participation may be something that he would say to move away from, but that the liaison and the relationship of being able to communicate between the two bodies was important.
Okay, Tom, do you have anything to say on this?
Yeah, no, the ordinance change doesn't eliminate the ability of this board to appoint a liaison and somebody to communicate with the planning commission. All this does is take away the mandatory requirement of an official appointment of such a liaison. So the statutory amendment or ordinance amendment doesn't prohibit the de facto liaison, it just eliminates the
Okay.
requirement that it be so.
All right, we'll open the public hearing. Anybody signed up to speak?
No, sir.
Close the public hearing. Anybody wish to make a motion? All right, hearing no motion,
Move on to the next agenda.
we'll go to the next agenda item, which is the joint meeting with the school board. Don't you wish you could handle all your business that quickly?
Just taking notes.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Don't
like-
we wish we could handle some of it?
I'm gonna call our meeting back to order. We were in recess, so thank you. And we would like to thank you for meeting with us. You know, I remember a couple of years ago when we had our meeting out at the airport. I think that broke a lot of things on communication and instilled a lot of communication between the two boards. I felt like that everybody, your board and this board, came away from that meeting that day with maybe a little bit more understanding of each one of our jobs. So we appreciate that, and I think this is a continuance of, from that meeting of getting together and trying to understand where both of us are coming from. So we would like to thank you. I'm going to turn it over. Have you all met Mrs. Dr. Tanner?
No.
Okay, Dr. Brenda Tanner, she is our interim superintendent. We're glad to have her, and has been superintendent before, so she just came in running. She didn't have to have any time to get started. She's been running ever since. So I'll turn that over to you.
Oh, well, thank you. It's so nice to be here and meet those of you that I haven't had the opportunity to meet. I appreciate already the support that you provided to the schools by either things you've done in the past or the connections that we've had through some celebrations so far at Locust Grove Elementary School with that, and then also at our convocation yesterday. We are running because we're getting ready for Tuesday. So those children will be here and we will be ready. So we appreciate the opportunity to work with you tonight. We knew we had several things that we'd wanted to discuss, and we're prepared to review our CIP and updates on that. I know that it's my understanding that that was approved in December by the board, and it's on a two-year cycle. But as we've explained throughout the process, we're constantly reviewing and updating that as the work has progressed, and providing updates to our board so they have an understanding of some of our top priorities. As we look through it, we know it's a multi-year plan, and we just wanted to provide you with the latest updates that we have in terms of the work that's been done.
They all know Matt. Well, Mark, maybe you don't, or Mr. Johnson, maybe I should say. I'll be a little bit more formal. But everybody is up there that knows Matt, and he's probably one of the smartest people I've ever met in my life. But he should be a teacher, because he's one of these people that when I ask him a question for the third time, he doesn't talk down to me. He tells me the same answer again until I can understand it. So that's a nice compliment for Matt. So Matt, we'll turn it over to you.
But we don't want you to really change over the teaching look right now.
No, we don't want you to.
And as Dr. Tanner said, we've got this plan that was approved back in December, and we had shared it with you as part of the budget presentation in February as well. All we have tonight is really an update of the status of where that's at, and then any kind of detailed questions you may have on the projects. It's a little different format here, and we're working with Mr. David to integrate even more into kind of the county's program and software as well, to hopefully make it, the reporting a little more robust and clearer and more transparent for the public as well. So if you could switch me over. In front of you, you should have a paper copy of the packet. I'm just going to go through here electronically as well. The first page, the purpose of the CIP, the methodology. I just note under the methodology, you'll see this on each page, a 1 through 5, kind of the priorities that the school board used in establishing which projects would come through. Obviously beginning with safety and security and health as the main priority, and then going down to positive impact on learning environment. Able to balance the cost budget-wise, but also certain projects need to go in priority order before you can begin the next one. That relates to number 3. Number 4 is then operational cost, efficiency, positive return on investment, and then 5 is purely aesthetics, community pride, and kind of development, maybe unrelated to the others. So you'll note those that will be on the side of the next few pages there. And then at the bottom is just a glossary of some abbreviations and the facilities as they're referenced throughout on the following pages. So the first page is kind of a look back at last year, fiscal year 2013-14. At the top I've noted the sources. This is generally by fund. So the county capital fund, which has historically contributed $417,000 set aside for the school purposes. We had a carryover amount last year of $1,514,000. And then within the operating fund of the school board budget, different line items there for facilities, HVAC, transportation for bus replacements, and so on through there, down to the food service fund, a separate fund related to cafeteria, which is entirely self-sustaining for any projects that would be done there. On the right-hand side, I've noted the source and did link those down to the expenditures down below, so you could kind of see where they tie in on 1 through 10 there.
Can I say something
Sure.
real quickly? I just want to make sure that Mark probably remembers, but when you look at the 1.5 million as carryover, that wasn't all money that was left over. That was some money also that had projects that were going on that hadn't been paid for, because normally we don't have 1.5 million. So I just wanted to make sure, see if you remembered that. If not, I would just remind you. So we did not have $1.5 million left over. Most of that was projects that were going on and had not been paid for.
And you can see, note below where that source near the expenditures, the number 2 would relate to those carryover, and you can see how many projects were, these are actually in progress at the end of last year, and that's where the carryover relates to. And I'm going to hit a couple of highlights on these pages. I think Brian gave me 15 minutes, so I'm going to try to run through it quickly. We obviously only have an update on this past year and then the year we moved into, 2015. but I will run through the other ones just to kind of give you an update where we are long-term as we get into the 17-18. But part of that carryover amount, about 8 or 9 down there, is preparing the old Locust Grove Middle School to receive grades 3 through 5, $250,000. That is complete. Substantial portion of that went to preparing the playground as well as the infrastructure, particularly technology in the building. And then the supervisors were gracious enough to provide another $250,000 for us to operate that going forward this year. But this is just related to the capital. We're up and running in that school and ready to go, complete with that project. A couple other items right below that, some big ticket items around Porterfield and the high school and some of that master plan. I've highlighted there the deferring of $200,000 for site grading new track tennis courts. That's going to keep carrying over until 2018 when we start that. But I've noted it there, and also at the bottom that highlight corresponds to that. So we'll see that on the coming pages. That's us starting to accumulate to the point where we can begin to design and then construct and begin some of those projects. But it's a 4 to 5 year window there in terms of getting it able to get there. Below that, you can see we've started some progress there at Porterfield Park related to the surveying, the retaining walls, and some of the bleachers there. Those are currently ongoing, and some of them are probably going to have to wait until after football season's over before you can finish those. But we're well on our way with those, and particularly the design and planning around it. And then just a couple more down there, middle of the page, there's an item called OCHS Capacity Expansion Phase 1. That's complete. That related to the expansion in the basement of the science classrooms and the learning cottages out front, or modular units. Obviously that's all done, but it was part of carryover and completed this past year. And also the master plan study related to Orange County High School and Porterfield Park and some of our facility needs there. That's complete as well. You can see the $134,920 that went into that. Is there any questions on the past year? Kind of what's complete or in progress or deferred?
Why are there, go over again, like the Porterfield Park and the upgrade of the tennis courts, the number there is 0?
Right. Those are left in just as a reference point from when this was approved in December of, we had made those adjustments because the master plan was coming in and informing it, and so the school board made changes of the tennis courts there or resurfacing, and built them in later for these site grading and some other projects down there.
Okay.
But it's just left in there because that's how it was
Okay.
initially approved.
On the, and maybe you can't make a general statement about it, but on the funds that were carried over, where you have complete by the project, were there any funds left, or does complete, should we assume by complete that means those are the funds that were actually expended? I'm just trying to get an idea of to interpret your coding here.
Hard to speak to overall. Some were over, some were, the master plan came a little bit under what we had initially earmarked for that. But some of these, like the water tank at Unionville, went a little bit over the initial amount there. So it was, you're going to see this as part of the carryover for this year, kind of a bottom line where we're at, which is probably going to be coming to you in a few weeks. But
well, let me ask a slightly different question. The dollar amount that you have there, if the project is complete, is that the actual expenditure, or is that still the budgeted?
That was the budgeted approved amount.
Budgeted
it's not
approved,
the actual.
Not the actual, okay.
And we'll be bringing that forward.
Yeah, okay.
And if I'm looking at something where I've got in progress, then some portion of that has probably already been expended, and the remainder is to be carried over.
Right. A lot of them is we can start the 2 weeks after school, end of June, but we can't get into July, and the auditors make you book it back to the, you gotta have it complete.
Well, some of the numbers, like $36,612, made me think that looked like a completed item. That looks like an actual.
Well, and part of the carryover, when we came to you for carryover approval last year, we knew exactly.
Right.
It was complete at that time, but it was complete in August, and we came to you in September, so we knew exactly how much that was going to be finished.
We had a signed contract in June, but we couldn't do the work until the next fiscal year, so we carried over the exact amount.
Right.
The $200,000 that's deferred. So will that be a part of the carryover for this year?
Yeah.
And
Yes.
then you're gonna be adding some amount to that, so that'll be carried over, the
Right.
new amount will be carried over the next year?
Right.
Okay.
And I'll follow that through,
And you-
highlight it.
You had put in place a multi-year plan of accumulating an amount to get to the point where you could actually do the
Yeah.
project, I think.
Beyond this, it'll be an extra 300 per year.
Is that what it is? Okay.
Yeah. Get to that.
So not to, just so I make sure I understand, you're saying, basically for the budget we're in now, there's 300,000 in there?
Well, there's two in the past year we're gonna
Right.
carry over. In the new year, 14-15, the year we're in, there's 300,000.
There'll be three,
forward.
so as a portion of the carryover a year from now,
Be five.
$500,000 of that will be this deferred money, okay?
And I guess you see that in the fiscal 215.
Yeah, you're right.
See, right now, our track we can't even have, school meets at our track. It's in such bad shape. The tennis courts are in bad shape, but they can still have meets there, but on the track that they can't.
And a lot of the reason behind that being the first project is a lot of other things fall into place, whether it's expanding the high school, redoing the parking lot, doing anything with Porter Field. The track was kind of the central point there, and that's why it's put forward first. So in fiscal year 2015, the current year we're at, similar format at the top, the funding sources. The one change there, as I mentioned before, was this board put up an additional $150,000 into the capital allotment to the schools. As part of that, the school board put $150,000 within its capital projects to make that commitment to the new track and tennis courts there. And so that is what makes up that highlighted item there, deferring $500,000, that extra $300 keeps going forward. You can see a few projects are already started, some are just pending. A lot of the window replacements are kind of contingent on some other window replacement projects being completed first. There's no questions on that, Aaron?
Just looking at your 400,000 for transportation,
Right.
that's 4 school buses?
It's five, but the price is getting more difficult.
Because I see the number, it doesn't change
Yeah.
through all the ensuing budgets.
And we've been fortunate in years past in terms of trade-ins of old ones, to offset the cost. Generally in the past, it's been about 80,000 per bus. We've seen that increase to about 90 recently, particularly if you look at a special education bus, which we have some of those too. Obviously that's gonna run 95 to 100 or more on some of those. So we've been fortunate in the past offsetting there, and that's kind of what was approved last year with the board, but I'm sure that's gonna be
Okay.
updated going forward.
Matt, those are cash purchases,
Those are
right?
purely cash purchases.
We've talked, with Dr. Mercy and Brendan and things, is there may be an opportunity for us to maybe, and whether we do it next year, I don't know, but, work into a lease purchase, because the operational life of these buses, I think the state Department of Ed is 10 years, 12 years.
They fund you on 15.
15.
It used to
but-
be 12.
So it's going up, it's going in the right direction for sure because of the craftsmanship and technology. And so if we start plugging in, for the sake of discussion, $10 buys 10 buses. And we lease purchase this over a term of 5, 7 years, depending on what we look at the interest rates. What we can do is just, that's an ongoing amount, so that as that is retired, we just keep replacing buses and we have a set amount. I'm familiar with setting up those kind of programs, and that may be something we wanna look at instead of the cash purchasing.
Are we really getting more time out of more miles out of those buses?
We have some that are over 15 years old, but we rarely, on average, you're looking at 11 years or so, typically, before we have to trade them in, turn them over. In terms of the maintenance costs, replacing an engine, even 12 isn't pushing it, but
Right.
15 is definitely unrealistic.
And sometimes when you get to the end of a cycle of a bus, you find out that there are issues that are, add to the expense of just the parts and having replacements in, and that adds, it becomes very costly just even to find the parts that you need as the bus ages out, let alone keeping in running order for especially distance trips. You just wanna be very cautious about that.
Probably get worse as they get more electronic.
Well, it's a little bit more complex than maybe it used to be, you know, when you open the door
Yeah.
like this.
The days of buying new motherboards for buses are probably
Can you imagine one 15 years old?
All right.
Ready for him to go on? Okay, yeah.
Looking at next year, this is 15-16. Obviously, no status update here in terms of the projects. Again, just highlight the carryover coming in, 300,000 per year, adding to that project. We're up to 800 there that year. Hopefully, complete the final phase of some of the window replacements, which was a safety issue at a lot of the schools we have, particularly the elementary.
Any questions in 2016? Matt?
And 2017, here's where a couple things to point out in this project. Halfway down the highlight, design costs related to site grading, the new 8-lane track, fencing, tennis courts. So that's the first kind of drawdown of the balance we've been accumulating over time. Estimated cost of $165 just for the design, and then deferring or carrying over another $935,000 to really begin and complete that project in 2018, fiscal year 2018.
Let me ask a question. When I'm looking at the county capital fund for 2015, you say the 150 is for the match for the Orange County High School. And then after that, both the 417 and the 150.
Yeah, that's a typo. That's a typo.
Okay.
My apologies. The 417 has been the steady state. The 150
Okay, so
was
that's
additional last year. Yeah.
that's separate.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any questions on 2017? If I'm going too quickly tell me. Okay, Matt?
Well, I guess
It's a lot to look at.
I have a general question. It seems that in both 16 and maybe 17, that there are very few dollars going to sort of the routine maintenance kind of things. I mean, in 16, for example, you're showing a total use of funds of $1.5 million. But over half of that is the carry forward for the track. And then
No.
another 400 is,
The 800 isn't all the way over there on the right, so it's not a part of the 1.5. See where the dark line goes over?
Yeah, there is nothing.
oh, I see
That's
what
not
you're
in
doing.
that.
Yeah,
Okay.
so the
All
800
right.
is not part of the 1.5. The 809.
And your estimates of remaining funds each year, basically just what you figure will be carried over for projects that are halfway through or not started.
Right.
well, let me go back to my point. Except for the 400,000 that's being spent on buses, and then there's a good bit of money for phone and computers. But as I look at the facilities, you've got restrooms and flooring and roofing that come to $150,000. That looks to me like a really good year compared to the others that we're seeing. Is that because we're caught up? I mean, I'm not trying to do Doug's business, because I'm sure he's keeping an eye on this, but it just seems to be a different, a little bit of a different picture for that, for both 16 and maybe 17.
We have this performance contract, which basically, our big hardware, like our boilers and stuff on all of our buildings, have basically all been replaced. So,
Yeah, I see your replacement windows, you've got,
Yeah.
like, 300,000 and, 615 and 180 and, in 16, and you're, don't have any in 17 or 18. So some of these things are just, you're finishing the project.
Yeah, those actually started as early as last year.
Yeah.
And those were mainly attacking the plexiglass windows in a lot of schools where we have some major safety
We're
issues.
trying to get rid of the plexiglass and replace them with glass over a period of time.
And in the process, double pane glass that will actually prevent the hot air from going in and out. A little more energy.
That may explain some of the maintenance stuff that.
And hopefully, we're pulling a lot of the maintenance issues out of capital improvements and under the operating
Right.
funds.
Yeah, I mean, you'll see some of that.
Some of
and,
them are.
and to Jim's point, $6.2 million construction project for the performance contracting that's purely gonna be paid for based on the energy savings.
Right.
That could be 1 to 2 million a year that we would have had in HVAC units and
Okay.
lighting and other equipment.
All right.
So that helps out quite a bit.
And
Yeah.
that was in 8 of the schools. We didn't do anything to the new Locust Grove Elementary School because it wasn't being used at the time. So that performance contracting was for all the other schools except that one.
Is you going to fold that into the performance contract as well, or?
I don't think we can,
We
Doug.
would like to, but, we hit the debt ceiling, so to speak, with the
Gotcha.
6.2 million.
Gotcha.
So we would need to amend that in order to take on another
Okay,
maybe 800,000 to $1 million to do
Okay.
that school and the related.
And that was
projects.
another conversation.
Yeah. Just need to start.
Yeah.
Sorry to jump in, but that was, I'd be remiss if I didn't. Actually, it's gonna be sort of interesting because we have 2 schools that are exactly identical. One has been refurbished with all the stuff that's supposed to save energy, and the other one is not. So over a period of years, we're gonna get an exact picture of how this thing really works.
by spending more on the one that hasn't been upgraded.
Well, I mean, you've got to know what.
Understand.
We'll see, hopefully.
That's
Maybe
what you're
we were
actually
trying to
hoping
look at
for,
the
right?
savings we were gonna have on the one that wasn't.
Okay.
Look at it the other way.
That's it.
The glass is half full.
Exactly.
I believe we're on year 2017. 17?
Brian's giving us a look. You only got a few more minutes, Matt.
Oh, he's doing fine. The hook's not coming out.
I think we're at
Part two.
2017.
Now, let's finish up there. We talked about the deferral, but there's a project there that I think gets to Mr. White's point too. Replacing the shingle roof with metal at the Hornet Sports Center has been one that really initially was right up here to begin this year, and the board deferred it there as part of the master plan. But it's a major problem. There's a lot of leaks, as well as safety issues there. But that's one where it took up a big chunk and got moved a couple years back to make room for other things.
It's not gonna make it to 2017.
I was gonna say from, recent perspective on that, that's something that I think needs to be at the forefront of our consideration, because as I had explained earlier, if we defer something such as a roof over time when there is significant problems that have been identified, it can cause a ripple effect into other infrastructure problems. So we want to really monitor that in order to make sure that we have that taken care of before it becomes a major issue.
Maybe we need a microburst to pull it off.
Doug said.
Insurance job, it's like earthquake.
That's right. Either that or.
We got a lot done with that money from the earthquake.
We told Louise that we were sorry for your loss, but we helped, we gained on that.
We had good insurance.
That's right.
Moving on to 2017-18, which is the final year that's approved and set out. A couple of big ticket items there. Number one, closing the walkways between the building, the annexes at Unionville, Orange Elementary, and Lightfoot. And you'll see this on the next page going forward. A future project is to do the same at Gordon Barber, where we have spread out campuses at an elementary and primary schools, and they're not connected, aside from maybe some covered walkways and a few sidewalks, but you've got kids moving between. And it's not like the high school where you've got 15, 16, 17, 18-year-olds that are moving on to college. It's an elementary issue. Note that, and I note the construction of the track and the fencing and tennis courts, so that's where it hits the big savings.
Why is the phone system lease payments in the capital budget vice the operating?
I remember that conversation, but I don't remember the answer.
Well, the auditors force you to capitalize that as a capital purchase, so it comes out of the operating
It is,
fund.
this is a lease purchase?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, all right,
5-year
so,
agreement.
I mean, I'm looking at it for a number of years, that's why I wondered if it was just a standard payment or whether it's a lease purchase. Okay, got it.
Right, it's just our debt payment each year.
Don't we use some of those E-rate funds to pay that, or am I mistaken there?
We get more of that back to cover a lot of our communications and some of the fiber optic that we installed for the schools. Schools and libraries get a reimbursement of E-rate, federal program that's being modified as we speak.
I notice here in each of the years, you appear to have the computer replacement for student and SOL at like 340,000, I think is the number
Right.
carrying through it.
That's a purely state allocation.
Is that what that is? Okay.
Local match. And it's gotta go towards student labs, computer labs.
That wasn't that a 5-year cycle
For which,
for computer replacement?
this is the student SOLs.
This is the SOL.
Annually, we get state funds for geared towards SOL labs.
Oh, okay, so that
That's-
comes straight from the state.
There's a small local match there, but it's less than a lot of your other.
Okay.
And the last page, future projects, and there's some semblance of trying to break it down from coming up to 19, 20, and 21. Again, I just point out that the canopies there at Gordon Barber, rough estimate there, 4 years down the road, as well as some of these projects that you get exposed to through the master plan related to the high school in Porterfield. You'll see those kind of throughout, dominating the project list there. Because we have those fleshed out, we don't necessarily have everything else fleshed out that far ahead.
And we've had the discussion before with you. when
So
you
that
see the-
that 21 and later is, there's no end date on that later.
Right.
All right.
We've had the discussion before when you see the porta potties at Porterfield Park, because we can't use the restrooms that are there, so you see how far down that is. And it'd be nice to have that a little bit closer. It doesn't look too well to have porta potties down there, but believe me, they're better than the bathrooms that are there.
And since you mentioned that, and this is purely hearsay on my portion, but also my opinion. I've been told that you will be working off the state contract for contractors to do those restrooms. I would encourage you all, if possible, to use as many local contractors if they're within a reasonable price.
But we're
or
not doing
quality.
those bathrooms.
Once again, like I said.
Yeah, we're not doing them.
I know.
Oh,
I'm just
okay.
saying in general, you know, some of the local establishments, the local businesses are in, and I hear it both from the general county as well as the school board side, that they're not using local contractors. So I just encourage, whenever possible and feasible, to please.
And we hear you, because we hear the same thing.
That's-
And we won't talk about it. Yeah.
Yep, I just, like I said, I get it on a daily basis, so, just wanted to make sure I could do it.
What, throughout this whole 15 through 18, what if any significant changes from what we saw last year?
There's no changes to what was presented in February, it's just updates.
Updates meaning what?
On the projects that were listed, but all
Just the projects, but the proposed budgets for 16, 17, and 18 are the same as we saw before?
Yeah, they haven't been taken under consideration or changed.
Okay. All right.
Well, it was just last year that we came up with this master plan of what we wanted to do at the high school. So those numbers are starting to appear in our capital improvement program now.
Okay.
We didn't, I mean, a year ago, we didn't even know this. Unless my time was gone by.
On a related matter, someone mentioned the performance contract. Are we a year into that yet?
We are about complete with the project, so we're about set to make our first debt payment, and I can report that. While the contract reads that the actual savings that are guaranteed is supposed to begin being measured at the time that they finish the project, so this September through next year. What we'd already have seen just from June to October of last year was around $105,000 in energy savings. And that was with only a couple of projects done, the lighting. Now we've got all the boilers replaced, HVAC units. We experienced even larger levels throughout the winter of savings. And we plan to propose as part of the carryover those savings, so we're kind of paying the debt down ahead, almost. We're experiencing those. So about a $284,000 debt payment to go towards that. We think we've saved more than enough that can help out and offset other maintenance and capital improvements. So I hope to report that to you in the coming months, maybe as a larger discussion.
You say you wanna use that to pay down the debt more rapidly, or use it for other
so what we
maintenance?
could do is what the contract states is that next year's savings would go to make this payment, but we have to make this payment in September. It's the first one. So then you're banking on next year's savings. Well, we've already saved that much in 2013 and 14 to do as a carryover item to pay it. So it's a consideration.
And this contract is not something that just ends and they go away. They're committed here for a long term, because if we don't save enough money to make the payment, then we go to the state, which is involved in this contract, and then they come back to the contractor, and the contract says he's gotta make up the difference.
But even in a bad winter, we saw the savings, and so if we get mild weather like we'd have, I mean, it could be more substantial going forward.
One comment I had that I wanted to actually do during our regular board meeting, but I was preoccupied with something else. Went to the opening of Locust Grove Elementary School. Mr. White and I both attended that, and very nice tour. It's one of the nicest elementary schools anybody will probably ever see. But all the work that's been done in there and everything, and the staff seem to be right on top of it. And then I went to the convocation yesterday up at the high school, and needless to say, you have one of the most dedicated, enthusiastic staffs, ranging from the instructors to the janitorial to the bus drivers to maintenance, you name it. I was very impressed, and it was an extremely nice ceremony.
Thank you. And you all weren't here when we talked about when we were going to open up the elementary school, and Mr. Frame was concerned about how much money we were going to be spending on the playground, because we were having to convert the playground from a middle to an elementary, so I really want you to go look at that playground.
All right.
We had to convince him that you couldn't use the metal
As I
swings
stated,
anymore.
It is one of the nicest elementary schools you'll ever go to.
All right. I'll be up there.
I just want to make sure you go look at it, because it's very nice.
So, all right.
Wear your sneakers though, so you can try out.
Uh-huh.
There's some things on there that'd be challenging.
I
I assure
agree.
you.
Just the 2 feet of mulch is challenging enough.
There was a lot of
Jim.
money going to be spent on that, and it was.
All right.
I'd like to echo Jim's comments on Locust Grove Elementary. You could see the dedication and the commitment to by all levels to make that ready and make it a great experience for the incoming students and their parents, as a matter of fact. And so that was a proud day for you guys, no question about it.
I think part of the proudness that I have with that school, which was certainly not my idea, was Becky's, but that we now have all the children in that end of the county that are in Head Start in a school. None of them are in trailers. And I think that is a huge, big compliment. Now we only have Head Start students in trailers at Gordon Barber. So hopefully that'll be a project that we'll be able to do something about at some point. But
And
I'm
that's
just really glad to have those students out of trailers.
That's an insufficiently publicized benefit of opening that school. I had forgotten about it. I remember the conversation,
Well, I
but I'd
don't think it
forgotten
came
about
up
it
then.
until I saw it.
It
And-
didn't come up until after we had decided, Becky
Yeah.
brought it to us, right?
We figured out that we could.
That we had the room.
That-
Because everybody was saying, oh, you're opening up the school and it's only half full. Well, it's not.
Yeah, that's an important part of the story.
I think it's
because-
4 rooms, isn't it? 6 rooms that Head Start, and I think that's just huge for those students.
It also gives the principals, and, you know, I'm thinking primary and, at the elementary school and middle school level, both have maybe some room to grow. But those principals, they're gonna start to think about a special program I can do, because I've got a room over here. Those kinds of things, they might have thought about them 2 years ago, but nothing could happen around them because they didn't have the facilities to even implement it.
And they're gonna
So-
raise the money for them, right?
We're not gonna talk about that.
I'm talking about things that are really don't take money. It takes teacher time. You can divide a class into 2 groups and have special things. It's just using your personnel in a different way. But if you don't have an extra classroom that you can provide for that, even if it's just a part-time thing, those are things you can't do. I'm just talking because I was a classroom teacher. It's like building a closet at home. You build this big walk-in closet, and you walk in and say, oh, we'll never fill this up. Well, go back and look at it 2 years later, and then.
And to follow up with what Jim is saying, you know, as the state continually makes the rigor higher and harder for these SOL standards and the pressure that it mounts on these teachers and principals to come up to par, to come up with inventive ways to help these kids learn, because not all kids learn the same. And, you know, it's like Jim said, they now have some room to expand and take those kids and do remediation with them and hold them after school and work with them. And, you know, and we sat this evening through a meeting and we're learning that, you know, with our special ed kids that have to meet this same criteria, and what we're gonna have to do to help these children learn and grasp. And, you know, we're actually talking about holding maybe some of those kids over at Locust Grove after school. You know, Jesse's talking about extending his day there where the teachers will stay with some of those special needs children, work with them to get them up to par so they can help do better on their SOL. So it's not gonna be any wasted space there or time. You know, it's gonna be utilized, and, you know, there's a lot of excitement there, and, you know, our hats off to those teachers, cause like I said, they sat down today and laid out their intentions to, you know, we did well on SOLs, we are still below, but it's because they keep changing the rigor on us. You know, when you think you get it, they change it. So, you know, but we've got good people in places, and we're gonna meet it, and with this new school open and the programs that we can now help get these kids into and do, we're moving forward.
Well, and all the teacher grants that the various Orange County groups support the teachers with, maybe places to use that.
Yes, exactly.
That's exactly right.
Do you
And
all
the
have-
money that you guys helped with the STEM programs and all of that kind of stuff. Just throw that out there.
See, we came with positive things. Do you all have any more questions? Matt, do you have anything else? Doug? Oh, I'm sorry. Brian?
Oh, no, I've got 2 other items I wanted to touch on before.
Okay,
the
let me
meeting.
see if we can finish this up. Let me see if
Sure.
Doug has anything.
I
Anything
think I'm
else?
good. I mean, y'all did bring up a point about noting that there weren't a lot of projects in the future years. In some cases, because we don't know what we need done yet. In some cases, if we have a commitment to do certain things and don't have the money to do other things. You know, other equipment's gonna break, and you know we need to replace other windows after we finish the worst one. So, you know, that's always out there. You know, we set
There'll be
aside-
some new requirements from the state of some kind.
Oh, yeah, you know it.
Thank you, we appreciate it.
Right.
Mr. David?
Chairman? Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I'll go ahead and.
Surely, go ahead.
As you all know, we passed by my update, Glenda and my update on the state budget information to also, because I was also going to revisit that with the school board. So everybody's going to be getting this update, and I like to start out before I get into this. I like the quote from Charles Dickens' Tale of Two Cities. This is the best of the times. This is the worst of times. This is the age of wisdom, and this is the age of foolishness. What you're about to hear is all of that. In front of your places is a document that has this on the front of it, and then also we've given you a separate so you can read it. I'm going to go through this as part of my PowerPoint. In my agenda item, I put challenges and opportunities. I would like to make the best of times on the opportunities and the challenges the worst of times. Let me speak to the opportunities I see before us this year. And I think integrating you all's CIP, which this board has taken a proposal of I guess, moving and working on its CIP outside of the normal budget practice as a first step. Certainly, Brenda and Matt were ready, accounting for existing staff time and resources, but is certainly willing to integrate and we'll refine this as it's going forward. So I think that's a real good opportunity. The financial markets like to see a comprehensive CIP for a locality that is schools and general government into one document. That would certainly inure to our creditworthiness by showing a combined approach to capital facilities. I think, yeah, go ahead and pass that out to them.
Yeah, we already.
The other thing is that I think the funding that was put forward in this fiscal year for schools, and you all recall how we worked through that, certainly with the board, of identifying those high priorities of opening Locust Grove Elementary School, salary increases, were all the result of the tax increase. I mean, I just want to say that what the board put forward was certainly made all those resources happen. There's another thing that I think with opportunities that going forward, and this was something that I got Dr. Bob to agree in his last will and testament, and I'm probating that right now, and we'll bring that forward. But he and I talked.
Sorry about that.
He and I talked, I guess, in a global sense about where are the opportunities between the general county government and the schools to achieve some operation efficiencies. Not in the classroom, not the curriculum part, because that's not what we do, and it's what you all do and do very well. But where are the shared services? Certainly self-insurance is one area that we're already doing, and we're certainly seeing the economies from that. But then there's opportunities for fleet management, facilities management, procurement. I mean, you can go down the list. And this is a lot easier said than done, frankly. And I just got a report from VACO. There are not many localities between the school division and the general county government that integrate these type of services. And I don't think it's because of it can't be done. It's just trying to get, I guess, some of the will and some of the resources and holding existing personnel harmless and things. And so I think there's really opportunities. I think Dr. Tanner and her interim status and whoever you all select, I think kind of keeping this kind of open-minded attitude of how can we come together to make efficient use of the taxpayers' dollars that they've given to us as stewards, and how we might be able to achieve some economies. And I'm very confident that between Matt and Glenda, there's a financial piece that we can get there and things. So I offer those as opportunities. That's not to say that this next year we'll be able to do all this, given you all's working through new leadership. But I think if we can kind of keep that as an underlying theme of looking for those opportunities, that only certainly inure to all of our benefits. Now, sorry to be the downer, but I really felt it was important to bring back to the board, and now taking this opportunity, some information I received about 2 weeks ago. I attended the VACO Leadership Summit in Richmond, and I didn't go see the governor on Friday, but I got enough information on Thursday to suffice. I didn't need to hear it from him. Let me just read you some of the numbers that the state is dealing with. And by indirect, we're going to have to deal with them. The state is going to have, their shortfall in this next biennium budget's $2.4 million. Billion, excuse me. Phew, I wish it was only million. 2.4.
Boy, I was getting ready to smile.
882 million more than was expected. This shortfall is largely because of federal government sequestration. And that impacts Northern Virginia and Hampton Roads. It doesn't really materially affect us except for perhaps Rocketdyne getting federal contracts through the Navy and things. But we're not military or DOD intensive here, but we have a lot of people that are employed by federal contractors and things, so an indirect way. They are going through a process of reforecasting it. The rainy day fund could be brought to bear, but we really don't know how the governor is going to deal with that in this current year and then for the next year, because they just on the front end of a new biennial budget. December 17th is when he will report his amendments, so there's not much we can do to look at what it means for Orange County, particularly on the school side and the constitutional officers until December 17th. I think they're going to hold that information pretty close because it's not going to be good news. Now, what I also want to do on this theme of information, I'm not let you all be judge if it's good information. There was a presentation given by Jim Regenball, and Jim was lead staff person for the House Appropriations Committee. He is about as knowledgeable on the state budget than there is anybody. And he works for his own shop, Fiscal Analytics. He gave a presentation to us at VACO. I'm only going to hit some of the high points because it's some of the slides. I'm not Jim Redenbaugh, and I can't put you into the context, but I think you'll get some of the data points going through this very quickly. And it's on this slide deck. It's going to be on the monitors, but we'll kind of run through, and we'll do low tech, high tech here. So if you would advance the slide, please. This was the title of his, and I lifted this right off the internet. So next slide. He was exceeding 1.55 billion, and unfortunately, it's gone a lot higher. But the data point that I would make to this is that the general fund for the state revenue growth contracted in FY 214, contracted for the first time without a national recession. That's significant. As Virginia went, we used to be able to ride recessions because of our federal government spend in this thing. But the rest of the country is starting to grow, and we contracted. That's a significant point. Next slide. Despite 5 years of U.S. economic recovery, the federal contracts cutbacks are hurting Virginia. The one data point here is down at the second to the last bullet. In federal fiscal year 2013, federal spending grew only 0.7%, with military spending declining by 7.2%. And most of that's in Hampton Roads in Northern Virginia. Through total spending has declined 0.5%, defense spending declining 5%. From economic diversification, basically Virginia's basket is filled on the federal government. And that, as a matter of course, is going away and will not come back. And so the state leaders really have a challenge how to reboot our economy. Now, what does that mean for Orange County? I've got some ideas, but let me get through some of the reasons behind this. The next slide is that you can see by national, we really are heavy in information and business professional services. A lot of those are federal contractor jobs and defense jobs in Hampton Roads. So we outperform the nation in these high-paying wages, but that's exactly the positions. A $100,000 Department of Defense employee is going away. How do you replace that $100,000 PhD? The next slide is that their federal cutbacks have resulted in low growth in high-paying jobs. This is another slide of that. Next slide, please. How do we replace that? As you can see, hospitality, leisure, and health. The demographic bubble, the baby boomers are getting older, and healthcare is certainly a growing industry, but that's because of the demographics of it all. Business and professional services are lower and falling. Next slide, please. If you look at what the tax revenue that are generated, you can see the top three: management, professional, scientific, technical services, and information. They're all average weekly wages above around $1,500 or higher. that's a pretty significant wage. Those jobs in the federal government are starting to go away. Next slide, please. Okay. Well, I missed one slide here. I apologize for this. There's some other slides in your package that you can go through, but this slide, what Jim Regenball did in this slide, and under this backdrop of this great news on the state's economy, is what the state is doing for local education. Jim had this slide, and it didn't come through as clearly as I did. There was some data transfer, but those are dollars, $4,868 per student. That is what the state, inflation adjusted, growth adjusted, per pupil K through 12. And so as the state officials say that they're spending more on local aid to education, they are, but if you adjust for everything, it's less. And that, with a number of my county administrator colleagues in the room that day, we all pointed out that was the slide to communicate to our governing bodies. Because as the state goes in its looking to save money, 50% of their budget is transfers to local government. And at the top of that list is education. Next slide, please. One of the things that's eating a lot of the oxygen in the state budget is general fund debt service. You can see that pretty much the credit limit is maxed. They are now using general fund dollars for transportation. That was never done before. The Transportation Trust Fund is tapped out. These are a number of the data points that the state is in a significant situation. Next slide, please. The aid to locality is still declining. I can't tell you what all these numbers mean other than I just took the headline that has Jim Regenball's information to us. Next line, please. There are headwinds, and I think it's fair for all of us to say that we receive state for locally administrated programs, education being the most core, basic, fundamental, purposeful, moral purpose service that we provide. But then there's law enforcement. There are certainly other constitutional social services, health department, and some court services. But how will the Virginia economy replace the loss of these high-paying government sector jobs is going to be a big deal going forward. Next slide, please. Our revenues are only starting to grow, to turn around, and we've got a slide here at the end that will show that. But you can see where we rely a lot on real property, probably too much for a locality our size. Next slide. This slide I thought was very interesting from the standpoint is that it really chronicled the choices that we have to balance our budget. This board made a lot of advancement in catching up on capital equipment and capital facilities because those were the first things that you didn't spend money on. You used those funds for operations. And then increasing tax rates, which happened, was the next order, and you can go down, layoffs and things. And none of these are pleasant. None of these are pleasant, but that certainly chronicles it. Next slide, please. This was a slide I thought was useful just to see where we rank in the nation. This actually came out of a JLARC study, so this is directly out of the Joint Legislative and Audit Review Commission. Next slide. Our spending reflects local tax policy. And next. Here is a chart of our organic revenue growth in Orange County, meaning if the tax rates, all the tax levies between business and real estate stayed the same, here's what our economy's general real property appreciation, new construction, and our growth is. You can see it's not a trend line like the state's debt line. The slope on this is positive, but it's not that positive. And so that just kind of gives us a backdrop of the organic growth that we will have available for spending on necessary things. The last page, I think we have this as a handout. This is the detail behind that chart. This is the ice cream eye chart. Give you ice cream headache on that. So I felt like a wet towel, but I felt it was important, and certainly my responsibility to communicate this information back to the board, certainly from a standpoint that the state has and will continue, and I would submit, is that they are going to they're going to look for opportunities for us to pull our own, that they're not going to come forward. And as much as we can ask them to do it, they are just not going to have the wherewithal to do it, frankly, because their revenue, until there are other the economy is rebooted in Virginia, because we're behind California on a per capita basis as far as federal government largesse. So that then only redoubles our need to look at economic development here in the county. How do we grow our tax base? How do we create jobs, create the atmosphere, the environment? How do we do those things to make this a competitive place to do business? And so I think the board has certainly given me enough direction to work on those things. We're on the cusp of hiring a new economic development director, and I think I'm going to give a briefing on the Route 3 process, the Germanna Area Wilderness Plan, which is, I think, a significant step forward. So with that, I'll stop. I'll answer some questions, but I'm sorry I was to the party like this, but
Thank you, Trip.
did I? Anything?
No? Want to move on to GWAP?
Okay, good. Thank you all for humoring me, but
I appreciate the information. I think you're setting us up for what's to come, yes?
Well,
She tells it like it is.
I want to say, there are dynamics out there that are beyond our control, but for us not to be aware of them, I certainly feel it's incumbent upon me to make everybody aware. So whenever I have information, they will get it, you all get it. And I will try to do my best on that for sure. So, all right, moving on to what are we going to do about it? All right, that's the next thing. So,
We want to take a 5-minute break.
You want?
Yeah, we can do that.
Are we finished?
Oh, I was going to give you a briefing on this.
Oh, okay.
Do you mind if I turn it up in here? I'm freezing.
It's a little
Sure.
cold down here.
Let's take a 5-minute break.
Thank you.
Let you run
She
around
wants
for a
to do
while.
some jumping jacks. Gosh, I'm freezing. And apparently, are you freezing too?
Off. So we'll move on to, I guess, another little briefing, and I certainly want to recognize the board members here, particularly Lee and Jim, as being really instrumental a year and a half ago, kind of thinking up what are we going to do? How are we going to create investment in this county? And I guess I can say this since they're my bosses, the foresightedness of that work and the support of the full board is really, I think, setting us on a trajectory that we can start kind of bootstrapping ourselves, and how are we going to create an expanding economy here in the county to meet some of our legitimate needs and things in light of these swirling winds. What I'm going to lead you through in a very quick place, given the time that we've been here, is the culmination of what was the Route 3 corridor study. And as you know, a year or so ago, Jim and Lee and Planning Commission and EDA saw some trend lines in incomes and job creation and age that really, if we didn't start bending the curve on those, there was going to be some challenges on just operating a minimal amount of services here in the county. So how are we going to grow the economy? And that the eastern part of the county, the Route 3 corridor, already had the highest density of people. It already had the most infrastructure, had all the ingredients to take a look at and how we might be able to create an atmosphere
competitive business atmosphere to recruit new business investment, to create jobs, and certainly an expanding economy. And next slide, please.
Brian?
Yes, sir.
Could Allison determine that so they can see a little bit better when they're looking over at that screen? They're all gonna have sore necks by the time.
Oh, they've got the handouts too.
Oh, okay, well, I saw them keep looking up.
Yeah.
Oh, we just wanna make sure we're on the right
Okay,
page.
Right.
Thank you.
This first slide is simply the Route 3 study and the charrette that came out, I think, confirmed a lot of already known, but again, the private developers saying that we don't have infrastructure in the capacities and in the locations that make a lot of sense from the land development. That we had a lot of the ingredients, but we needed to look at utilities, we needed to look at design standards and things that are utility connection fees, a lot of granular type things that were creating barriers to developers doing work here in the county. And so we took that charge and began a conversation as a steering committee, which is made up of 2 members from the board, Jim and Lee, 2 members from the Planning Commission, and 2 members from the EDA, and then it's staffed by myself, Greg Zodi, Josh Frederick, and Rose Deal. And we're doing all this in-house. We're making whole cloth here. We felt it was best that we tried to do this without hiring somebody to go bring us back a plan. What we've done is we're promoting a 50-year vision for the county. And that if you take a 50-year look out, that the area that you see delineated there should accommodate whatever growth is going to come. And what we mean by growth is that the Weldon Cooper Center and Virginia Employment Commission predict the county's population, deaths, births, net migration will be about 10,000 more people in 2040. I don't want to go, I don't even want to figure out what goes into demographers' calculations for that, other than the fact that 10,000 folks will be at 45,000. With that comes a corresponding demand on services, schools, fire EMS, parks and rec, libraries, just start ticking down the list of what we do. And so how do we accommodate that growth in an orderly manner that allows for the infrastructure to be invested? How do we create an expanding economy first before having the housing come, or try to get those as linked as possible, that the commercial economic development happens first before the housing. And so what we did was we drew these lines. These lines do not follow property lines. They do not follow roadways. They follow municipal boundaries with Spotsylvania, natural features, Wilderness Run, Rapidan River, and then a series of drainage ways and a utility easement. You know, the power line that's behind the middle school, that's generally where the southern, westernmost line. So that if the county does all its investments and does all its ordinances and regulations and zoning and things, that area is what should accommodate the future growth of the next 50 years. So this was taking a very long view of the county's development. Next slide, please. Then what the committee decided to do was to take a look at, let's dial it in, because each one of this is, you can't do this level of work at such a high level. Let's break these into sub-areas. And that we started off with the Charette's recommendation that sub-area 1 at the very top is the area that already has zoned land, it already has water and sewer in sufficient locations and capacities, and really is low-hanging fruit for us. And then there are some areas like sub-area 5, which is Lake of the Woods, is pretty well developed, Wilderness Shores, sub-area 2. And then there's sub-area 4, which is if the county's going to have a Reston Town Center, a Kings Mill, a master plan community, that's generally where it's going to be. If the county is going to work with developers to create an economic investment zone where jobs and business investment will be done, it'll be done in that area. But then, the same token, we also have 2 areas, sub-area 3 and sub-area 8, which really in 50 years should look exactly the way they look now. The national park. That's an asset. I can't think of a better asset in the growth area than a national park. How do you enhance that asset? How do you protect that asset and use it to the advantage of the area? Sub-area 3 is the community college, which is a workforce and higher education asset, as well as Fort Germanna, which I understand is as rivals Jamestown as historically significant to the United States. The story just hasn't been told. And so that, from a visitor standpoint, tourism, economic development standpoint, is pretty huge. And then these western areas, 7 and 6, are kind of where the natural migration of growth would go. Next slide, please. Back up, I'm sorry. One thing that we're doing in each one of these sub-areas, and you'll see, and I've got copies of the plans, we divide each of these sub-areas into 3 categories. We have land use and development, economic development and marketing, branding, and then infrastructure. And then we go through and triage the current condition and then the future condition of what we want. And so we're addressing land use, economic development, and infrastructure for each one of these sub-areas. Some of it's a lot of the same, like we know we need to do a master utility plan, a transportation plan, but some of it's more unique to that sub-area. Next slide, please. One of the first elements that we worked on was the basic template, kind of setting the table. And transportation corridors are the way you do that. That's where utilities are generally run. That's where land value is created. When new roadways go in, you have higher value for the land fronting that road. Everybody gets that basic economics, location, location, location. And so we started looking at this down at the bottom, a relocation of Route 20. Pretty big deal in the park. But there seems to be enough interest that if we were able to get everybody kind of lined up and then find the funding, it would make the park more contiguous. You wouldn't have this principal arterial road going right down the middle of it. So the park becomes a much more usable park from the Park Services standpoint, one would think, than the way it is right now. What that would also do is line up with a local arterial road that would be a parkway running through the sub-area 4 to make that development potential and run utilities and create that more of a master planned area. What it would also do is Route 3 is a major connector road, and if you think of traffic like water, the more friction you have, the slower it goes. And so the idea is to keep Route 3 as frictionless as we can by getting local traffic off of Route 3. The other major thing is that this property, this area, is equidistant between 2 of the state's largest labor sheds. Fredericksburg points north, Culpeper points north. And so for us to recruit business investment here, I think it'd be a really easy case to say that you could locate your business here and recruit from 2 labor sheds in a reverse commute. There's a huge advantage to that. There's also a retail component to that you're drawing from these 2 areas into a point equidistant. So that's why these roadways are so important to keep 3 as frictional, as throughput as possible. Then Flat Run Road is kind of the other side of this triangle, and getting that on a more I think I made the remark to somebody, that's probably a game path from the 5th century BC. I mean, you go through there, and then it's just been a wagon trail, and then Indian go forward, and that has to be straightened out. As you can see, we're proposing to do all these major roadways on a 4-lane alignment with multi-use trails. Just think Fairfax County Parkway. And so you quickly, if you take your fingers and make a triangle, you've got our transportation network in this area. And so if you think of that core having all these multi-use trails along that alignment, and then as development occurs, it starts branching out in kind of a artery, capillary kind of way, it becomes a significant asset to the quality of life for the folks that live there. Next slide, please. This just gives you an example. Everybody has agreed that we're going to stay away from text, that the plan is the map, and the map is the plan. And so what you have in front of you is the sub-area 1 plan. It's pretty straightforward of what the 50-year vision is there, and each one of these sub-areas will have a future plan to it. I think that was my last slide. Oh, and here's sub-area 2, which is Wilderness Shores, which is pretty well built out and has some infill development. I think that's it. Yep. That's the Germanna area plan. The only thing I'll let Jim or Lee chime in here, or Mark or Jim, is that one of the things, at least I think this creates an opportunity, is as this plan is finalized, there's a number of other more heavy-duty plans, infrastructure, water, sewer, transportation that we've got to work in. But the idea is to line our capital improvements program, our 5-year capital improvements program, with this plan so that our facilities, schools being a big component of it, line up with where the growth is going. I really want to stress the point that, at least in my opinion, is that the quantity of services will probably be greater just by the virtue of more people, but the quality will be the same as it is in Barbersville, so that the sheriff deputy that shows up in Barberville would be as well equipped, well trained. It just won't need as many of them because that end of the county won't have the level of development. And so with schools, you can get the direct correlation with that. The last thing I'll say is that there's a strong desire to, once this is underway, once it's been adopted, is to replicate, not duplicate, but replicate this process for thinking of a economic development, a growth strategy for the Orange-Gordonsville 15 corridor and how to work through what that means. So I'll stop there. Did I get it all? Did I miss anything?
I would make one that when you look at the Gordonsville Orange corridor, that will have its own characteristics based on what's desired down there in that area. And the other element is these areas of business concentration the design standards, the zoning categories and things that we would put in those won't necessarily be the same, but they won't be applicable to the entire county. So there's still the desire to maintain a rural aspect of the county. And so we're not trying to spread this off the entire county. We're trying to take advantage of the transportation and infrastructure corridor that's available on 3, and then eventually on 15, and do that, but without necessarily trying to change the whole county.
The only thing I think I would add is, as Brian mentioned, we're trying to do this ourselves, and one of, among many reasons for doing that is we're also trying to make it a very open and public process. I mean, all these materials and lots more are put online almost the day after they're created, and all the meetings are open. We've done lots of public discussions, had several meetings at Lake of the Woods early on with the public and these kind of things. And so we're really looking for input, ideas, critique, whatever, to help this. I mean, if at the end of this process, if we don't end up with a product that the community both understands and supports, then we won't do anything other than put it on a shelf. And Lee and I have put enough time and sweat in this thing. We don't want to see it on the shelf, I guarantee you. But it'll go on the shelf unless we get public involvement and their input such that they can support it.
And we seek from you getting to your constituents, we seek comments, not just from the people in the Route 3 corridor, but people throughout the county. And we're interested in, this is going to be a subset, or it's going to be an addendum to the comprehensive plan. So it's going to have to go through all the comprehensive plan approval process. And it's very important that this doesn't be seen as, oops, here it's in front of my face and now I've got my first look at it. I want people to say that this is an ongoing process, an ongoing and open process, and we will try to create some formal processes for getting inputs as we progress. But I don't want the first time that people to see it as at a planning commission public hearing. I hope that, and so we keep pushing probably harder, and we'll keep asking the press to do their part and making sure that that this is well understood by everybody as to what we're doing and what we're trying to achieve.
With that, Lee, a couple of things. The original intent is contrary to what a lot of people said. A lot of people said, oh, you just want to bulldoze everything down and build all sorts of stuff down there. It's exactly the opposite. We want to develop a very intelligent, quality area to the county that draws good business, good people.
Yeah.
And we want to control in a positive manner the growth so that we don't have the sporadic growth that other areas have had. And it should benefit the entire county.
Yeah, that's probably the mantra is growth is going to occur because that's where the thing is. And generally when people say, well, I want to rezone to this, there's a lot of sense of property rights and we get these little sporadic things pop up, but they're not coordinated, they're not well managed. And so if we have a plan, and a plan that accommodates, we don't want to say business, no, we're inviting them in, but we're providing them an environment that is attractive and that would be profitable to them and enable them to make money, pay taxes, provide decent employment for our citizens. And that's all a part of it, but it's a managed approach to it. And you know, we got inputs from the preservation groups in terms of the gateway study, and there are things in that we are trying to incorporate and consider. We had people from the development community come in and do that charrette, and they gave us a bunch of recommendations. So we're trying to take into account, and we've been in to talk to, well, we'll be talking to VDOT, but we've talked to people about water impoundments. We've got a lot of people yet to talk to, and so, but we're just hoping that anytime you have any people that have interest in it, please let them look it over and comment. It's on the website, and Jim and I are, pile emails onto us. Unfortunately, we're not getting a lot yet.
Brian, can I make a comment? Just
Sure.
in terms of having seen this and walked through it, it's obvious that a lot of thought has gone into this in terms of long-range planning. Because when you're looking at land use and economic development, we know how important that is. And it's also, we're very appreciative of the fact of being provided information early on, because as you look at areas that you had identified, I think your comment was like sub-area 4, if I'm not mistaken on that. That was the Reston type area center that could be developed in that. And we know at a couple levels the important role the school systems will play. One is in terms of when you're looking at attracting people to the area in terms of living. We want to make sure that we're involved in that discussion early on. The school system's involved in that because we would know that as we plan, you can build houses a lot faster than you can build a school. So looking at that would be really very important. And then, as I mentioned to Brian, as you look at the future of any school, you also look at thinking somewhat out of maybe a traditional structure to say community use, because that's very important. And then the other piece that would be very important for the communication with the system as you move forward on something like this is if you're going to attract businesses here, they will be asking about the quality of the schools and the services that are provided for the students. Not only in test scores, but also, as you well know, that if you watch some of the movement that's occurred from, say, the Fairfax to the Loudoun movement and all that growth that, many years ago when you could drive to Dulles and, think you were going out in the country. It's very different now, but as that movement occurred, also did a shift in the population and expectations of the schools. They were finding that, people were saying, well, I'm coming there, but I'm coming from here, and this is what we expect. So we need to make sure that our programs and services are up to par. And as we look, I appreciate your conversation about how you balance across a county, because I've worked in a county that it took you an hour or more to drive across from one end to the other, and that was one of the issues in that system, was to say, what's the sense of equity? So if you have a lot of growth on one side of the county and you're not ignoring the other side, you're not building new schools or new programs on one side and ignoring another. So I appreciate that perspective as well as how it will impact on the schools.
We even this evening we had 2 issues before us on the action thing, dealing with our tourism trails in that area. I mean, so we're not waiting till we can get to the 15 corridor. We're looking at things down there in terms of of helping us in economically in the tourism side, taking advantage of the assets we have down there. So we're not, you know, it's not all being focused at the eastern end of the county.
When Lee says down there, he means up here.
Okay.
Or out there.
Whatever. East, west, north, south.
Yeah, Mark's comment is like with us, you know, when you say my school, our schools, or all of my schools, yeah. So.
Well, we're trying to think of the whole county, and recognizing that there are certain things that different people want in different areas, and trying to make sure we accommodate that. I think developing some commercial that can help, you know, build our tax base, we think is a useful element of what we're trying to do.
That's what we have to do.
But I appreciate you not wanting to turn the eastern end of the county into Central Park. That would not make us unique.
That's been my mantra since I first ran for office.
And I appreciate that tremendously.
I want commercial, I want businesses, I want the amenities that make for you know, a nice community, but we can manage it and I think do it well.
Absolutely.
Well, you have to look at, really, there isn't anywhere else to go. I mean, 15 might have a 4-lane highway, but it stops before it gets to another 4-lane highway. And 3 is the only place that has it. You know, that's the only place that there is, if you're talking about the kind of growth that we need in order to bring economic development, you know, that's where it has to be.
And since the majority of that growth will be in my district.
Yes.
You know, I just have to throw that one in.
But you all see where the 3 new schools are also.
Yes, yes.
Well, yeah.
I believe that's my district as well.
Yes, it is.
And the comment I keep getting, and Jim and I both get it, when are we gonna get a high school down here? And I say, not for a long
Give us $80
time.
million, you know, plus adding on to
Get this
the.
plan developed and, you know, then we might have a high school.
That's why we've talked to
They
you
have that
about the
choice.
expansion of
Yes.
the high school. We know that there's not gonna be another high school down there
And
for a
we
long
recognize
time to
it,
come.
and that's, you know.
And we have to accommodate.
That's right.
We don't want those trailers in the front yard forever.
Well, and the other element is, you don't start splitting your high school until you've got enough
Right.
students to be able to offer decent,
Equal.
curriculums, and, you know.
Right.
The other thing is, Brian mentioned the number, the Weldon Cooper projection of another 10,000 people by 2040. That works out to be something like 0.7% per year. It's less than 1% a year. And so 10,000 sounds like a lot. That's 3,000 houses. But spread over 25 years.
Well, I'm not gonna be here to see it,
I'll
so.
be so old, I'm gonna
I'm not gonna be here.
One of the things.
No, I know I won't be here.
One of the things that we've heard from other people who have done programs like this is, you'll take all the heat for putting it all in place, and you'll never see you'll never see the results of your work.
Fruits of your labor.
Well, it's like building that middle school. You know, we all took heat for that. Teal and I really took a lot of heat for that up here. But we all knew that the time was gonna come. We built that school for $38 million.
Yeah.
You'd never be able to build that school, even today. You know, that was one asset of the economy being down.
Do you have anything more, Brian?
No, sir, other than to offer these 2 gentlemen to brief you all at the school board on the final working draft plan. Yes, if we can get on the agenda to do that.
Okay, the only thing is that Teal had come to see me, and I believe that you had talked with Brenda about the trail that's gonna go up behind Prospect. And we did talk about that, and my understanding from Teal and from Brenda is that you just kinda wanted a consensus vote so you can move forward on maybe doing a grant, and you do have our consensus vote on that.
Okay, well,
to
good,
be able
because
to
we
get-
already passed the grant today.
Oh, no.
If we weren't, if we were, if we weren't on tape, I would tell you what I put.
Madam Chair.
But I'll be a lady.
Madam Chair, no, that word was communicated back.
Okay.
So, no,
Well, Teal didn't tell me that, neither did she.
No, I had had conversations. One is just to be sensitive to people's ownership of property.
Mhm.
We've been trying.
But the idea was, with you all's consensus, we would get to a point where we could hire an engineer to start preparing the application.
Well, I'll have my words with Teal then.
Yeah.
He comes and tells me all the bad stuff, but doesn't come and tell me that you've already done.
But what we'll do is once that application is complete, which will show a lot more information about the trailhead and things, then we'll come and probably October timeframe to brief you all.
Okay.
Can I hear a motion?
So moved to adjourn.